My name is Dekker Fraser. I was a global product marketing manager for Sony PlayStation. I was a product marketing manager for a Series D Google-backed startup. I was a vice president of marketing for a Google accelerator startup, and I was a senior product marketing manager for a Series A startup in San Francisco. I'm the author of 2 product marketing books, Become a Product Marketing Manager and Product Launch: How to Go to Market. I also have my MBA in marketing from the #1 ranked business school for marketing in the world, the Kellogg School of Management. This video is a free preview of my course. You can download that course using the link in the description. Let's get started.
This is a one-page product marketing plan template. It's available for free as a Word document in the link in the description. Let's get started. So the first thing that you need to consider, and this is something that a lot of marketers ignore, is the desired outcomes. They jump straight into the strategy without knowing where it is they're trying to go, because the strategy is really only useful as a means to achieve outcomes. The first thing that you want to determine is the primary goal for your marketing plan. And there are 2 components to this. One is the quantitative outcome. So it might be something like generate $500,000, generate $1 million, generate enough money to retire, capture a certain amount of market share, or if you're selling a product where the price per unit is pretty much the same with you and your competitors, then your goal might be just sell 10,000 units, 1 million units, etc. The other component of your primary goal is not just the quantitative outcome, but it's the deadline. So you need some sort of constraint on when you expect to reach that deadline. So for example, generate $100,000 in pipeline this quarter, or this half year, or by the end of the year. Now, not all of your objectives are going to fall into that primary goal. So you want to put in secondary objectives. So these may be something related to humanitarian efforts. It may be something like increasing your brand awareness as kind of a long-term objective, even though your short-term objective is really generating immediate sales. Next, you have individual OKRs. So the different people in your marketing department, including yourself, should have objectives and key results. And they may have a number that are assigned to each person that's working with you. Now, after you have a sense of what the desired outcomes are, either for the quarter or the half year or for the entire year, or perhaps you even have a longer term time frame that you're dealing with, you want to work out who your target market is and define that target market. And the most important consideration is the target customers. So most marketers, they recognize this. They realize that they need to understand who the target customers are. But there are a few big mistakes that happen here. One is defining the customers in ways that are easy but don't really matter. So for example, creating a persona, Jill, she's 27 years old. She lives in North Dakota, and her dog and cat don't get along. These kinds of narratives usually don't matter. Sometimes they do. So if you're selling a product that is only used by men or only used by women, then demographics matter, but a lot of the time they don't. The kinds of things that matter are correlated with how they derive value. So things like the type of industry that they're in, or in consumer markets, it's how frequently they fly, or the fact that they're impatient, or they get very irritated because a certain piece of software doesn't work. So those types of things, they're harder to target and identify, but those kinds of behavioral and motivational variables are the things that really determine who your strategic target customer group is. The other thing you want to work out is who the subsegments are. So you may have a very strong bullseye target of people that really love your product. They're going to get a lot of value out of it. But then there may be a larger market of people that are a little bit slower to adopt, but really comprise the bulk of where your revenue is going to be after their first few years. Other subsegments are going to be different types of industries and different behavioral groups. So it may be current customers that use your product a lot versus consumers that are using your product infrequently. So maybe they only log in once a month versus every single day. So there are many different ways to subsegment the customer groups depending on what you're doing. Are you focusing on current customers? Are you focusing on prospective customers? Are you trying to build a business-to-business pipeline? Or are you trying to do massive consumer acquisition with a freebie? Okay, so the other big thing that people miss is the target partners. So your target market is not just the customers that you want to use the product. It's not just the end users. It's also the partners that you work with. Super, super important. So a single partnership with another business could mean the difference between spending 10 years reaching your target and being able to do it in 1 or 2 years. You also want to partner with people that are a similar size to you. It's often easier getting a partner relationship going with a company of the same size. It's also critical to get key influencers, so groups of people that have a strong influence on your target customers. These may be Instagram celebrities, but not always. Sometimes they're lawyers, sometimes they're accountants. Sometimes they're actual customers of yours that just happen to be very vocal and have a strong share of voice. If you really want your product to go viral, if you really want efficient customer acquisition, then you need to give partners strategic weight. They are part of your target market. Another important factor in the target market is market conditions. So if there are certain regulatory conditions that are changing, if suddenly a lot of businesses in your industry are going bankrupt, maybe there was a collapse in the economy in a certain geography you're working in, you have to make note of these changing conditions. These are not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. So maybe there's a sudden surge in demand for what you're selling that it really has nothing to do with what you did, but just a change that happened in the market. The second key component of your marketing strategy is going to be your value propositions. This is how you create value in the market, particularly for your customers, but also for your target partners. So you need to create value in different ways. The way that you determine your value proposition is by starting with the benefits that you are producing. So this might be time savings, and it might be monetary savings, or it might be incremental profit. It might be speed. It could be any number of things. Ideally, you can quantify these. So for example, you save your customers 100 hours a week. You are able to increase efficiency of lighting systems by $100,000 per factory. These types of things are key components of your value proposition. The other thing I want to point out is that your value proposition is not just one point. It's not just one benefit or one feature. It is a cluster of things that create value. Later, when you start getting into your messaging strategy and your positioning, that's when you focus on one aspect. But at the strategic stage, you really need to look at the various ways that you create value. So after looking at the benefits, or simultaneously with looking at the benefits, you want to look at the features. So a big mistake I see in a lot of market messaging is too much emphasis on benefits that customers don't care about, because often the way you create value is really at the feature level. So try to highlight the key features that your product has, specifically focusing on the ones that are unique or not yet on the market, because these may be creating more value than you realize. Competitor benefits is another thing you want to look at. So the fact that you automate spreadsheets or the fact that you save time is important, but it's important in the context of a competitive market. So customers don't really value the value you create if it's not above and beyond what competitors can do. You also want to look at the competitors' features. Are they comparable to what you have? And are the reviews of competitors' products talking about those features in a good way, or are they really not functioning the way that your competitors promise? And the last thing that you want to do is highlight what the positioning is going to be. So this is usually one or maybe several benefits, features, product attributes that you're going to emphasize in your messaging. And the reason you're going to do that is because you want to secure a position in the minds of the customer. Now, the positioning is a little bit tricky because we're talking about psychology here. It's about securing a psychological position by changing your messaging. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the way that you actually create value. Because the way that you communicate value isn't necessarily the way that value is created in a technical way. So this is the difference between the strategic level marketing and the more tactical communications level marketing that people are more familiar with in advertising. Okay, next we get into the tactics. So there are basically 7 marketing tactics, not the 4 Ps. That's a little bit of an archaic model, but this is a more modern version. First is price. Price, incredibly important because it dictates supply and demand. If your price is too high, you're going to see your sales plummet. If your price drops, you're going to see a surge in your sales. Of course, there are a few exceptions to this, like luxury markets that people always highlight, but by and large, customers are incredibly price sensitive. Do not underestimate the price sensitivity of customers. Incentives matter. So are there special promotions that happen, such as discounts, that are going to motivate time-sensitive responses from customers? Your distribution, incredibly important. Where are you selling your product? Are you on the shelves at a retailer? Are you at Walmart? Are you on Amazon? Are you on Salesforce AppExchange? How are people finding out about you? Are you selling directly to consumer? This has become increasingly important, especially with companies that are starting on Shopify, with a lot of retailers that want to sell directly to customers through the internet. Communication. Communication is usually what people think of when they think of marketing, but marketing is much more than that. Communication is things like your landing page. It's things like your advertisements, your Facebook posts, your LinkedIn content marketing, the content and case studies that you're sending through Outreach or through Marketo or through HubSpot. Your product. What are the specific features? What are the add-ons? What are the new releases that you're putting out? What is different about the new packaging that is going to go out this year versus last year? Services that are added onto your product. Is it that you have an exceptional warranty, an excellent customer success team, customer service that's 24/7? In certain markets, the services that are tied to your product may actually be more important than differentiating the product itself, because if you have to make a non-strategic purchase and you're looking at 2 different suppliers of a product that basically create value in the same way, they're basically the same price, what they're going to look at is the service add-ons. Can they get access to customer support quickly? Is there some sort of guarantee that eliminates the risk for them? Very, very important. Brand. So brands actually create value above and beyond what the product does. So brands often create value that is intangible. So it's things like, I feel good because this brand is fun and I feel more fun using this product. Or maybe the brand is just a signal. So maybe because it has a yellow sticker in the logo, it's an indication of price. So brand really helps support the other tactics in your marketing mix. Now, the last part of your product marketing plan is the execution. So product marketing managers are the hub of marketing, and the different spokes are the specialists. So one of the most important things is that you take ownership of the execution. And that means having a marketing asset calendar. So a calendar that shows month by month, week by week, quarter by quarter, what assets are getting released, what marketing assets are being produced. You got to make sure all that stuff's in sync, because you need to align the demand generation, the performance marketing, the content marketing, the social media gurus, the contractors, the SEO people. You got to get them all on the same page, and the easiest way to do that is with the calendar. Execution is also about optimization. So this is where growth marketing plays a strong role. Things like A/B tests, multivariate tests, very important. Measuring success after launch is also very important. So you need to be looking at whether you're on track to reach those goals that we set at the beginning. And the various sub-objectives that you set for yourself. And lastly, during the execution, what you're going to notice is that conditions change. Competitors release new products, new features. You're going to be surprised by different things that happen either internally, externally, with your customers. You got to take note of this and you need to respond quickly to it. So this is it. It's a one-page product marketing template, very easy to use, very easy to fill out. Just download it from the link in the description and happy product marketing.
I'm going to talk about a number of critical misunderstandings that product marketing managers have with respect to positioning. So one of the first mistakes is believing that emotional positioning is better than rational or functional positioning. This simply isn't true. We have research from McKinsey, for example, showing that positioning around functional benefits or things like product features tend to generate stronger word of mouth than positioning around emotions. And this is even true when we're talking about consumer products like cosmetics, where you would think that emotional positioning would be better. Now, my general view on this is that high-level positioning is not necessarily better than low-level positioning. And what I mean here is we're talking about the value ladder. So at the bottom, you have technical features, and at the top, you have kind of emotions, or in the business-to-business space, it'd be something like helping profitability, versus at the bottom, it might be something like connecting two items, things like that. Do not make the assumption that higher level benefits or higher level positioning is superior than functional level positioning. Okay, another critical misunderstanding is believing that positioning is just product positioning. So there's different types of positioning. Product positioning tends to be more rational. The reason it's more rational is because when people are evaluating products, it is because they want to make a decision to trial the product, to do a pilot of the product, to purchase the product, okay? But then there's also brand positioning, which is separate. Brand positioning tends to be more emotional. It tends to be more focused on the long term, and it isn't necessarily based around rational things because it's not trying to get people to make a rational decision. It's trying to get people to remember your brand and associate it with some sort of product category or some sort of purchase decision, but not in a precise analytical way, more in kind of a broad psychological way. So you can position your product and your brand differently, and there tends to be a split there between rational and emotional, but that's not universally true. Now, you also have services, which may be supplementing or separate from the product that you're selling. You can position the services differently. Okay, now, one of the more common mistakes that I see is with advertising. So your advertisement can take positioning that is different from your product and that is different from your brand. The reason is because an individual advertisement needs to deliver a single message a lot of the time because it can be too overwhelming to deliver an ad that talks about the entirety of the product, the entirety of the solution, the entirety of the value proposition. So an ad could just talk about one benefit, one feature, one job to be done, one use case. You can also have a campaign that is positioned differently from your product, your brand, etc. So the campaign, for example, could talk about one benefit, and then each individual ad talks about the features or the reasons to believe that benefit, or you could have the reverse, where you're talking about one feature and the benefits that come from that. Now, the other critical thing to understand is that the positioning can be different based on who you're targeting. So partners, for example, are going to care about things that are different from prospective customers. So prospective partners, you may position around certain types of value. Maybe the positioning is more around financial value, reimbursements, or strategic value that has very little to do with revenue. You can also position your product differently, and your advertisements, your messages, your emails, etc., differently based on the key personas that you're targeting, or the individuals within companies, or the different subsegments of your target customer group. Another critical misunderstanding is believing that positioning is strategy. Now, this is a little bit of a linguistic debate, but for the sake of consistency, I would say that strategy is choosing target markets that you're going to participate in going to participate in, and how you create value in those target markets, which is for customers, for partners, and for your own company. So it's the target market and the value propositions. Positioning is more tactical. I wouldn't say it's completely tactical because you're making big trade-off decisions when it comes to your messaging and stuff, but it's not as strategic as your value proposition. Basically, positioning is deciding what gets emphasized in your messaging in specific contexts, and those contexts are going to vary, and there's going to be various gradients where you're going to apply those positionings based on who you're targeting and whether you're talking about product positioning, brand positioning, or service positioning.
Profit. I want to walk you through a very basic formula for profit. This is important because it will help you sell your marketing initiatives internally and help you prioritize what you should be working on. It's really quite simple. Profit equals revenue minus expenses, but we can expand this to understand what drives revenue and what drives expenses. So now we have profit equals average price times quantity minus average cost times quantity. I prefer the simpler version of this. In other words, price minus cost times quantity. So you see, there are really only three ways to increase profit. Change the price, change the cost, or change the quantity sold. It's really that simple. Everything you do as a marketer can be tied back to these three simple things that drive profit. Let's elaborate. As a marketer, you are usually focused on generating more revenue. Marketers aren't as interested in the cost side of the equation. So to increase revenue, there are two approaches. You can either sell more or you can raise prices. Raising prices is a pretty simple task, but selling more is a bit more complicated. To sell more, you can either get more customers, increase the frequency of transactions, or increase the size of transactions. All of these help you sell more and hence increase revenue. If we go a layer deeper, there are actually two ways to get more customers. You can acquire more, or you can increase retention so that more customers stay. Either of these will increase your customer base. So this is basically a summary of what you're trying to do as a marketer. Increase revenue in all these various ways. Whatever decisions you make, whether it's running a TV campaign or shifting focus to a different target customer, you need to tie it back to one or more of these drivers. Now, I'd like to go even more advanced with this analysis because, you see, the purpose of a company is not to generate as much profit as possible. It is to have a high return on investment. In other words, a company's purpose is to be efficient at generating profit, not simply to generate as much profit as possible. Let me explain. Let's say your company has a ton of cash, millions of dollars. The company could invest it in the stock market and get a 10% return on that cash. It could also give it back to shareholders and let them spend it. Maybe they could invest it at 11% return. The third option is that the company could take that money and invest it back in the company itself. But what if investing back in the company itself would only generate a 5% return? Well, that's awful, because the company would have been better off investing in the stock market or simply giving the money back to shareholders. The company cannot be efficient at generating profit in this situation, so it shouldn't focus on generating profit. It should instead allocate money outside the company. That may lead to less profit for the company, but it leads to a better return for the shareholders of the company. There is one situation where companies are efficient at generating profit. This is where the return on capital is greater than the cost of capital. In other words, this is where the company has a competitive advantage. And there are basically just two types of competitive advantage: customer captivity and economies of scale. So as an advanced marketer, you're interested in a couple of things. The first is generating profit, which usually boils down to increasing revenue. The second is maintaining focus where competitive advantages exist. So, for example, acquiring customers who are captive and ensuring that economies of scale are achieved in marketing efforts. Advanced marketing doesn't just mean spending money so long as a profit is generated. Advanced marketing is about investing in areas where competitive advantages exist and building those competitive advantages.
Competitive analysis. Competitive analysis is an important role for product marketing managers. That's because product managers are often too wrapped up in critical day-to-day operations. They don't have time to analyze the competitive environment. The challenge with competitive analysis is that you can do it forever. There's no limit to the level of detail. For that reason, I have 3 approaches to help narrow your analysis. This will help you prioritize the most important aspects of the analysis. The first approach is what I call the specific purpose analysis. The second focuses on competitive advantage. And the third starts with marketing strategy and ends with marketing tactics. Let's start with the first approach, specific purpose. Here, you narrow your analysis to the specific purpose for which you are doing it. In this way, you skip all strategies and tactics that are irrelevant to the decision you are trying to arrive at. For example, let's say you were trying to figure out how to optimize your login experience. You might look at Google's login. Note the text, call to action, colors, and user flow. You can then look at other competitors of yours. You aren't interested in dissecting entire strategies. You are just looking at logins for your competitors. You can then document certain aspects in a table. For example, the number of login fields required. Now let's consider the competitive advantage approach. My process is based on the book Competition Demystified. This is one of the best business books ever written. It discusses the fundamental basis of a company's success. There are essentially 2 types of competitive advantage. The first is economies of scale. The second is customer captivity. Note that I haven't included brands, advertising, or even strategic buzzwords such as value propositions or target markets. Competitive advantage is mostly based on economies of scale and customer captivity. I'll explain each of these in detail. Economies of scale enables a company to lower its cost as it gets bigger. Let me give you an example. Let's say a company has a lot of fixed costs in a factory. As it gets more and more customers, it is able to spend its fixed costs and spread those costs across each of its customers. It's kind of like each customer shares a smaller and smaller piece of the fixed costs. And as more customers are added, the incremental costs get smaller and smaller. As a side note, economies of scale usually break down at a certain size, so there is a limit. In analyzing competitors, there are many different ways to estimate scale. One is using a website such as similarweb.com or SpyFu. Here, you can estimate the amount of traffic your competitors are getting and how much money they are spending on specific keywords. You could also look to social media for the number of followers that your competitors have. Here you can see that Sephora has nearly 17 million followers. Another approach is to use surveys to gauge brand awareness. Brand awareness can be measured in different ways. One approach would be to get a random sample of customers and ask them, what shoe companies can you name? If 50% of people name your competitor, then the brand awareness is 50%. This is called unaided awareness because you left the question open-ended and didn't supply the customers with brand names beforehand. With aided brand awareness, You might give a list of brands, products, or companies and ask customers which they are familiar with. Companies with high brand awareness will likely be strategically focused on economies of scale.
Customer captivity. The second primary competitive advantage is called customer captivity. Customer captivity is somewhat like customer loyalty. But it's not just that customers stay with you because they love your product or your brand. It's that there are structural reasons why they stay with you. There are structural reasons that make it difficult or expensive to leave you for competing products. There are three sources of customer captivity. The first is search costs. These are the time, effort, and resources required to go and find a replacement for your product. A good example of a product with high search costs is one that has been customized. It is difficult to find a replacement for a customized product. Therefore, customers tend to be more captive when solutions are customized to them. You can enhance search costs by adding customized features to your product or by making the buying process feel as though the solution is customized. The second source of competitive advantage is switching costs. These are the costs incurred by customers in transitioning from one company to a competing company. A good example of this is a product that requires a lot of training to use. If you have to learn a whole new system in order to use a competing product, then you're going to be resistant to switching to a competitor. The third source of customer captivity is habit formation. Products that are used daily and purchases that happen virtually automatically build habit or inertia. For example, people tend to be more loyal to Coca-Cola than to car brands because soda is bought more frequently than automobiles are. The role of a product marketing manager will vary from company to company, but there is almost always going to be ways that can enhance customer captivity. If you have a lot of influence over the product, you can push for features that have daily use or for customized or personalized dashboards. These will make customers resistant to switching and will enhance the long-term profitability of the company. If you don't have a lot of control over the product itself, there are still ways to enhance customer captivity. For example, you can push for long-term contracts or for landing pages that make the customer feel as though she or he is getting a customized offering. Also, as a strategic marketer, you can choose to focus on those customers that are the most captive and then focus your acquisition efforts on them specifically.
The third approach to competitive analysis is looking at marketing strategies and tactics. Let's start by analyzing strategy. The first part of strategy is looking at the target market. By this, I don't just mean the target customer. I mean the entire target market, which is defined by the 5 C's. In other words, customers, competitors, collaborators, context, and company. You can identify these in many different ways. Look at your competitors' ads and see who they are trying to target. Use websites like SimilarWeb to figure out what keywords they are using. Do a search for your competitors in the word partnership to identify who their collaborators are. Look at research reports or Google Trends to identify trends in the market. All of these help you map out the target market of your competitors. The second part of strategy is the value proposition. This is how value gets created in the target market for 3 groups of people: customers, collaborators, and the company. The value proposition isn't a single benefit. It is all the benefits, the various ways that value is created. For example, your competitor might help customers by making them do things faster and also cheaper. If this is true, then you have to wonder why customers would ever buy from you. Competitors also create value for collaborators by offering them special deals or perhaps giving them cash back for referrals. None of this information is going to be laid out nicely in a report for you, so you have to dig into the competitors' websites and social media channels. You can also speak to their customers, your own customers,
and look at news reports to piece the value proposition together. Once you understand what target market your competitor operates in and how it creates value in that market, you understand their marketing strategy. Next, you'll want to analyze the marketing tactics. These are popularly known as the 4 Ps. I don't actually use the 4 Ps framework because it's not robust enough. I use the 7 Ts, or 7 tactics. These are price, communication, brand, product, service, incentives, and distribution. Often when marketers create a strategic map, they'll use price as the primary basis of positioning. This may be helpful for you, but these days price isn't always the most important differentiator. These days, vertical differentiation, in which higher priced products are simply better, is not very sophisticated. Consumers have different needs and value things differently. That's why brands and communication are important in understanding the competition.
This is a competitor analysis template that I developed after 10 years in product marketing and teaching college-level marketing. The big challenge with doing a competitor analysis is that it can be very overwhelming. There are dozens of competitors that you could be looking at and thousands of different tactics that you can evaluate. And those tactics are constantly changing with things like the website, which is frequently updated. So there's really no end to it. What I've done here is created a one-page simple template that helps you focus on the things that really matter. And one of the first things that really matters is competitive advantages. What these are is the elements that make it difficult to steal customers from your competitors or for you to take customers and market share away from your competitors. And there are really only 4 types of sustainable competitive advantage. The first is the switching and search costs. So in some cases, it's actually expensive to switch from one provider of a product to another. An example of this is when you have software that's been custom tailored to you. You're basically stuck to the person that created the custom software because they understand it, they know how to maintain it, they know how to update it. Whereas if you hire somebody new, that person needs to spend a lot of time and a lot of your money learning that custom software. So that's a key competitive advantage. The other is search costs. So these are things that make it difficult to find replacements for the product that you're currently using. An example of this would be if you are buying something that's highly specialized, like a certain IT specialist or a specialized professional. Sometimes it's very difficult to find them, particularly in a specific region. Next is habituation. So, for example, with Adobe Creative Suite, a lot of graphic designers are in the habit of using certain keyboard shortcuts. So their muscle memory keeps them stuck to that software because if they do switch to different software, they have to relearn all these habits. Other examples would be products that are somewhat addictive. So things like Coca-Cola would be an example. Arguably, the strongest competitive advantage that you can have is economies of scale. The best example of this would be something like a natural monopoly or duopoly. So if you're participating in a market that can really only support 1 or 2 providers of a product at scale, then if somebody tries to enter that market, they can't really do it because they can't match your price structure and the cost structure that goes along with it. So if competitors are able to sell products at a cheaper price and be more profitable than you, then it's going to be very, very difficult for you to steal customers away from them. The last key competitive advantage is government protection. So these are things like patents and licenses that effectively make it illegal for competitors to take customers away from you or vice versa. So when I'm looking at competitor analysis, these are the first things I like to look at, is make lists of, do they have some sort of moat of competitive advantage that's built around them and based on these 4 things. So after looking at that structurally, I get into the marketing strategy. And the first thing that you want to analyze is what target customers are your competitors going after? They may have a similar product to you. They may have similar services to you. But if they aren't actually going after the same customers, then they're not really your competitors. They may look like competitors, but your customers aren't going to see them as competitors, and neither will your competitors, even if they're using similar technology. The other thing, and I think this is probably the big thing with marketing strategy that product marketers miss, is partners. A huge part of your marketing strategy is who you partner with. So for example, it might be a retailer, Walmart or Amazon. It might be certain app marketplaces that you're participating in. It may be key influencers that are endorsing your product. This is very important because if your competitors are getting a lot of traction with large partners and you're not, then you're going to be left behind. And you can actually replicate those exact partnerships, assuming that they're not exclusive. And if the partnerships are exclusive, then you can simply find a similar company to have an exclusive contract with. The other key part of the marketing strategy is the value proposition. So in what way are your competitors creating value in the market, particularly for customers, but also for partners? So for example, is it that they save time? Is it that they save money? Is it that they fix some critical integration issue in that particular product? It might be very, very narrow, particularly if you're in a small market with small players, or the value proposition may be very large, particularly when you're selling something like a suite of software solutions for small business, and your competitors have a lot of venture capital to support them. Closely tied to the value proposition is the positioning. So usually this is one, maybe two features or benefits that your competitors are choosing to emphasize in their messaging to secure a certain place in the minds of the target customers. So somebody might position themselves around speed, they might position themselves around cost savings. So it's very important to understand how your competitors are positioning themselves. And the easiest way to do that is to look at their homepage. Their homepage may have a tagline on it, and usually that gives you a sense of what kind of positioning they want in the minds of the customers. After doing the market strategy analysis, I like to look at the reviews, because the reviews tell you if what your competitors are saying actually matches what they're delivering, and the customer feedback is going to give you that. The first thing I like to do is look at a review source such as Google, for example. You can look at Facebook or G2 Crowd. There are a number of different review resources that you should be looking at. First thing I look at is just the numeric score. Is it a 9 out of 10, 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5? But it's also very important to look at the notes, because the notes give you the qualitative feedback that tell you whether the positioning is actually working. So if a company says that their product is very easy to use, but a lot of the notes that you're seeing in the reviews is that they're not easy to use, then that means that the positioning is not really held. Superficially, they're making a promise, but in effectiveness, they're failing to deliver on that promise. So that may mean that you have an open position in the market for you to fill by providing a superior product. After looking at the reviews, I like to look at the tactics. And there are basically 7 types of marketing tactics. I use this because it's a more modern version of the 4 Ps model that you're probably familiar with. First thing is the pricing. Very important to understand pricing because it dictates supply and demand. If the price is very low, then what that probably means is your competitor has the size and the economies of scale to be able to deliver at a lower price. That may not be the case. And if it's not the case, then it probably means that they're not profitable. The packaging is also important. So it's not just what the price is, but also how they're clustering their prices into things like 3 different types of plans. How are they basing the pricing? Is it based on usage? Is it based on the number of users? There are a number of different variables that can drive pricing, and making little tweaks to your pricing can actually have substantial effects on the demand for what you're selling. Another thing is the brand. Brands play a more important role in some markets than others, so don't spend a lot of time on it if it doesn't really matter in your industry. The services are also important. So even if what you're marketing is not fundamentally a service, it may be that things like customer support or warranties play a substantial role in convincing people to buy the product. And then you want to look at the product features themselves. Buy your competitor's product, do their free trial, get their samples, look at it, see if it actually does what they say it will do. Communication, this is one of the biggest parts of marketing. It's usually where people start. So this is looking at things like the advertising, the social media posts, the website, the landing pages. It gives you a sense of how effective your competitors are at communicating to the target customers. Incentives and promotions can matter a lot. So things like coupons, time-sensitive offers, and also you really want to consider the distribution or channels that your competitors are going through. So typically a lot of time is spent looking at competitors' websites, but the website doesn't tell the whole picture. It could be that most of their sales are coming from Amazon, or they're coming from Salesforce App Exchange, or they're coming from apps.com. So don't assume that the website is the most up-to-date version of how the competitor is marketing themselves. So after looking at the strategy, looking at the tactics, looking at the reviews, looking at the competitive advantages, there are a few key things that I really like to focus on in the end. First is the direct response offer. So are your competitors selling something like a demo or a free trial? Or are they really pushing a coupon redemption? Because these little offers and how the messaging centers around the offers can make a huge difference in your conversion rate, your sales pipeline, and ultimately your sales. You can also look at web traffic and authority. You can use things like Moz, SEMrush, SpyFu to get a sense of how much share of voice your competitors have and how much you have compared to them. Keyword rankings, also very important if you want to own a position in the market centered around certain keywords. Funding is important. You can use websites like Crunchbase to find out how much funding your competitors have. If they do have a lot of funding, then that means that they can probably have a broad value proposition or go after a broad market. If you have little funding, then you probably need to niche down, maybe focus on specific features, and have your value proposition narrowed to go after perhaps a smaller industry, like one industry or one specific type of customer, because people with a lot of funding can afford to go broader. People with little funding can't do that, at least not yet. Another thing that gives you a sense of size isn't just the funding, but also the number of employees. And I find that LinkedIn is one of the most reliable, up-to-date ways to get this. And the last thing I like to do is just have general notes. So these could be notes of things that you noticed while you were analyzing the other aspects of your competitors. It could be looking at the notes in Salesforce. It could be talking to salespeople to see what they're saying about customers. And it could be from talking to customers themselves, looking not only at their reviews, but actually interviewing them and discussing with them. So this is an overview of my one-page competitor template. It's available for free. Please click the link in the description and I'll send it to you right away.
Typically, product marketers will report to a director of marketing, a head of marketing, or someone else in the marketing department. Occasionally, the product marketing manager is going to report directly to the CEO. But often what people are surprised by is when a product marketing manager reports to the head of product, reports into the product team. This might come as a surprise, but if we look at the history of product marketing, it shouldn't be surprising at all. Because traditionally, the role that product marketing managers played was actually performed by product managers. So product managers would typically manage product development in the very early stages, and then they would also manage the products when those products went to market, so in the very late stages of the product lifecycle. But in the 90s, what happened was this role split off from product management and became product marketing management. So that's the reason why a lot of the terminology is vestiges from this era. So, for example, product marketing managers often don't come up with a marketing plan. They come up with a go-to-market plan, because this is the terminology that was used in the product management days. But effectively, when you come up with a comprehensive marketing plan, that is what a lot of people refer to as a go-to-market plan, or sometimes mislabel it a go-to-market strategy. So this helps you understand the context for what product marketing really is. It is the going to market of products. It is also a more strategic component to traditional marketing. And the reason is because it's more closely tied to product management, which has a more strategic role, rather than marketing communications, which is traditionally what marketers owned. So the kinds of work that would or could be outsourced to an agency, that's what I would consider more traditional marketing. So it's like media buying, advertising, communications, that sort of stuff. Whereas the things that are a little bit closer to product management, that are a bit more strategic, and things that are much more difficult to outsource, that's product marketing. So these are things like looking at the total addressable market, looking at analytics for the product itself, and being more intimately tied to what's happening within the company, and perhaps a little less externally focused on the kinds of things that an agency could manage. So I just explained what product marketing fundamentally is and why it is different from traditional marketing. Traditional marketing being more focused on marketing communications and the kind of work that an external agency could do. But in this course, I'm also going to go into great detail on demand generation and great detail on other aspects of marketing communications. Why am I doing that? I'm doing that because the role of product marketing management will vary depending on the size of the company and how mature their product marketing management team is. So often startups, let's say a Series A, a pre-seed, or a bootstrap startup, will put out a job solicitation for a position called product marketers. Really, what these jobs are is not product marketing the function, it is marketing for products. And when you're an early stage company, let's say you have less than $5 million, less than $10 million in revenue, the primary function of marketing is basically demand generation, especially in the B2B space. Because these companies cannot have too long a focus and cannot be too strategically focused because they're too immature, they're not developed enough, and they need to be focused on generating revenue. And that's why you, as the product marketing manager, at least in title, have to take full control of the marketing plan and make sure that you're focused on demand generation. Otherwise, the company may not be around tomorrow because you haven't generated enough pipeline revenue for the sales team. Now, the sweet spot for product marketing management is mid-sized companies. So this is maybe after $10 million in revenue up to, say, $100 million in revenue. The reason is because at this point, it's not just about survival. It's not just about short-term revenue and demand generation. This is when the core of what product marketing is becomes more important. And that is things like strategically defining what the target customer group is, defining and laying out who the potential partners are, quantifying and identifying the value proposition and how to position yourself in the market, developing a more sophisticated approach to product launches. This kind of stuff is really established in mid-sized companies. Now, at late-stage companies, very large companies or companies that have tons of funding, what ends up happening is the role of product marketing starts to get split up. So a lot of that strategic research ends up going to customer insights teams, so people that are more focused on research, or potentially external agencies that are commissioned to do market research. A lot of the tactical execution is delegated to other marketing teams, And the focus of product marketing becomes a little more focused on project management and pulling everything together. So I would say that the core of product marketing starts to get established in those mid-sized companies, whereas when you're at smaller companies, you do need to be more focused on demand generation and marketing communications, which is part of the reason I'm going into so much detail on that in this course. And I would say that because product management is so popular with tech companies, that a lot of this has perhaps less to do with how mature the company is, but perhaps more on how much funding they have. So a lot of these SaaS companies, for example, might get tons of funding, even if they haven't been around for a while. In those cases, basically you're treating it as though it is a mid-sized company because of the amount of funding that's available. So that role of product marketing is going to vary depending on the size of the company, the extent to which they have funding, and the extent to which they understand what product marketing is as a function, as opposed to simply marketing products.
Cannibalization. Cannibalization is when you promote one product and hurt another. As a product marketing manager, you have to make difficult decisions that involve cannibalization. Should you take Google AdWords budget away from one product in order to promote a new product? Should you promote one type of conversion over another one? These are difficult decisions to make, so some analysis is helpful. One thing to consider is that size matters. Let's say, for example, that you have a very profitable product that generates $40,000 per year, and you have another product that isn't quite as profitable, but generates $5 million in revenue per year. You might think it makes sense to promote the more profitable product, but in this case, size probably matters a lot more than profitability. A $40,000 product just isn't big enough to have an impact on your business. It may even be worth it just to drop the $40,000 product altogether from your product portfolio. That's because every product requires some level of fixed cost to support it, such as management resources. So in a case like this, you probably do not want to promote the smaller product if it means cannibalizing the larger product. But there are cases where the reverse may be true. For example, if you forecast high growth of the small market for the next 5 years and a decline in the larger market, it's probably a good idea then to cannibalize the larger product with the smaller one. So from a marketing perspective, that would mean taking up valuable real estate on your website, in your advertisements, and in your marketing budget with promotions of the new product. There are also situations where cannibalization is inevitable, but you just want to minimize the damage that you do. Let's say you're promoting a product that's particularly relevant during Halloween. You need to decide what pages of your website to promote it on. But promoting this product means less promotion for another product. So you might generate a list of all your pages and sort them by the amount of traffic that you had in October. You can see that pages A through E are the top quintile for traffic. That is, they are the top 20% of pages for page views. You can grab this data from Google Analytics and export it to Excel. We are particularly interested in the high traffic pages. That is because the pages with low traffic may not be worth the effort. Page Z, for example, might only be worth $100. So it's not even really worth changing. It might take $500 worth of your labor time just to bother with it. Now, you can see that pages C, F, and Z all fall within the bottom quintile for conversion rates. These are among the lowest converting pages. But since everything after F has low traffic, we're not really even going to consider them. What we're really interested in is what pages with high volume also happen to have low conversion rates. And based on this analysis, there's only one page that really applies. That is page C. By promoting the product on this page, we'll hopefully make a big impact on the business while making a small impact on cannibalization. We can run tests to see whether the conversion rate for the new product was higher than for the old product. We could also calculate the overall profit or revenue impact to determine whether to do the same promotion for next Halloween. Product lifecycle. Marketing decisions will vary depending on where you are in the product lifecycle. Here you can see the typical stages in sales curve that are used to depict the lifecycle. A lot of thought leadership in marketing comes from people who manage products at the maturity stage. Often these are consumer packaged goods products from companies such as Procter & Gamble. At this stage, there's a strong emphasis on competition and cost cutting to drive up profit margins. There is also a heavy emphasis on massive brand marketing campaigns. But as a product marketing manager, the context is often completely different. You'll likely be working with products at the introduction and growth phases. At these stages, you often don't need to focus very much on competitors. That is because the market is growing and can support many different competitors. Moreover, brand awareness may be so low that customers just aren't aware that you even have competitors. Cost cutting may also be less important. One reason for this is that growth will come from other sources such as expanding revenue and a growing market. Your target in this case, early adopters, are also often less price sensitive. So you can make up for high expenses with high prices. In these stages, massive brand marketing is also less relevant. You and your competitors probably haven't built up the economies of scale that are required to invest in TV campaigns. There are a few other points I want to make about strategy. In the early stages of a product, it is sometimes difficult to have a strategy. The product may change rapidly to accommodate whatever market signals you receive. You don't have a lot of data on customers, and it's difficult to find what your target market really is. And your value proposition may not even be all that different from your competitors. I'm a huge fan of strategy, but I must admit that in the early stages, trial and error can sometimes be more important than strategic planning.
This is a SaaS positioning worksheet, a spreadsheet that I put together for you. And what you're going to be able to do is start filling in notes on the right here for each of these different categories that I've listed. And just download the file, start filling it out. The way I want you to approach this is think of it as a brainstorming exercise. So just kind of jot down what you know right now, refine it later as you get more information. You can leave holes in it. It's not meant to be this kind of linear step-by-step, this is the way that you have to approach positioning. Because with positioning, there's going to be some jumping around, there's going to be some qualitative research that then you validate with quantitative research. And particularly if you're an early stage startup, you're going to do a lot of changes. And you need to be agile when you're thinking about this kind of positioning exercise. So let's take a look at where we're going to begin, which is the product attributes. So this is essentially the supply side. It's what you're able to supply the target customers. And I have here features, benefits, use cases, jobs to be done, outcomes, transformations, product categories, unique attributes. Okay, so there's going to be some overlap here, right? You know, whether you call something a use case or a job to be done or transformation, doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of using different terms here to get your creativity going, to get you thinking about things that perhaps you hadn't thought of before. And sometimes it helps if you think of it as a job to be done instead of a use case, or if you think of it as perhaps a unique attribute instead of a point of difference feature. So just start writing notes here. If there's redundancy, if things are repeated in different categories, that's fine. Okay, so starting, just kind of list out the different features that you have. Start listing out the different benefits, and they don't necessarily need to be aligned to a specific feature. There could be whole clusters of features that produce some sort of benefit, like save time, save money, etc., or speed up or automate.
I want you to think about the specific use cases where people could potentially use your product, and you may have some idea of what use case is most important, and then later when we look at customers, we may find out, oh, you were actually wrong. It was actually a different use case that they valued more, or what you may find out is they only valued one use case, even though you were trying to say that you were an all-in-one comprehensive solutions. That's something I often see in SaaS, where people think being all-in-one, all-encompassing is a value proposition, and then later when you do actually research target customers, you realize that they don't really care about that. They don't want an all-in-one solution. They just want that one key thing that you do really well. You can put that the jobs to be done, the things that they want accomplished. So they're hiring your product to achieve something, to do a job, like they would hire an employee, and you got to think through, okay, what is that job that your product's doing? Think about outcomes and transformation. So often what you're really doing with SaaS marketing is you're selling a transformation. You're selling an outcome rather than necessarily selling a specific feature or something like that, in some cases, in a lot of cases. You also need to think about the categories that you're participating in. So there may be existing product categories. You can go to Capterra, G2 Crowd, etc., see what those categories are. And later, when we start looking at competitors, you can start thinking about, well, maybe you can just own the category, right? If there aren't a lot of competitors and you're new and innovative, then the category may actually become your positioning. And lastly here, I have unique attributes. So these may be at the product level, or could just be kind of your financial model. Like maybe you're free, or maybe you provide things on a usage basis instead of a monthly basis. Or it could really be fundamental differences in how your product works. Like maybe it uses artificial intelligence where other products don't. So once you looked at the supply side, now let's look at the demand side. Okay, what are customers actually demanding? What are their needs? And I'm starting here with pain points, because if you solve a pain point, like a red hot pain, that's kind of the easiest thing to sell and to market. And those pains may vary by target. So for example, target A could be a specific industry, or it could be a specific persona. So it might be the CEO. Target B could be the CFO, or it could be a completely different industry. Depending on how you segment, and depending on whether you're doing account-based marketing, how you define targets may vary. And it also may mean the pain points, the priorities, etc., will vary based on those different people or those different companies or consumers that you're targeting. So the first pain points I want to start with is what the customer has top of mind every day. They have some sort of pain. Maybe they don't have enough sales. Maybe they're just sick of doing something manually. I don't know what is top of mind for them. And the important thing to recognize is that what's top of mind for them may be completely unrelated to your product. Do not assume that your product needs to solve a problem that's top of mind for them. Okay, it's often the case with SaaS that you're actually trying to market something that is not top of mind for the buyer. It's something that may be top of mind at when a particular event happens, like a lawsuit or a technical breakdown of their existing software, or maybe when a virus hits or something like that. But generally, day to day, they may not be thinking about it. If they are, then that's great, and that's going to be easier to market. Now, the other type of pain points I want you to think about are specifically related to your category, your product, or your solution. So maybe they're sick of other competing solutions that they use and that they don't provide this, or they don't use artificial intelligence, or their predictive analytics is wrong, or the automation's too slow, or the automation's out of sync. Like there could be all sorts of pain points centered around what it is that you're selling. And there's also the flip side. So often with positioning, we're focused on the negative. What is the problem that we're solving? But we also need to think about the high level aspirations. What do they want? What does a target customer really want? Do they want to be $1 billion company? Is it an entrepreneur that just wants to retire with $1 million in his or her bank account? I don't know what it might be. The other thing that you want to do is hone in on specific frustrations that the targets have with the status quo. And the status quo might be spreadsheets. It might be an employee that does a job that SaaS could. It might be pen and paper. It could be just notes in a filing cabinet. I don't know what that might be. Okay, next, on often it's good to have like a list of the top priorities. Like these are the main things that the target customers care about. And, you know, there may be 5, there may be 10, depending on how much data you have access to or how many people you've spoken to. And another thing here, and this becomes more relevant when you're getting deep into research and maybe you're working with a research company, is the willingness to pay. So the willingness to pay to solve pain point A may be different from pain point B, and the willingness to pay for specific features may be higher for some than for others. Another key thing to evaluate is the current tech stack. So often the first question that somebody might have when they're considering your SaaS is, does it work with what we use right now? So does it work with their ERP? Does it work with their CRM? Does it work with their practice management system? Does it work with our word processor? Whatever that is, it's important to take a look at their tech stack to kind of lay that foundation of what you're going into. Because if you're a standalone product that doesn't integrate with what they're using, they may or may not want that. In some cases they may, because it's less complicated for them technically, but it's also going to be a pain in the butt later in terms of saving time, etc. Another thing to jot down here is the barriers they have to reaching their goals. So if we know their high-level aspirations or just kind of their midterm goals, what are their barriers to getting there? And it's possible your SaaS is removing those barriers to help them get to that goal more quickly. Now, something I want to point out when you're doing customer research is that typically you start with qualitative research. And the most basic form of that is just asking on Quora, asking on Reddit groups, subreddits, asking on Facebook groups, asking on social media, like your own personal network, perhaps on a LinkedIn post, asking in Slack channels. That's probably the easiest way to start getting this kind of research. Then what I would move into is emails or perhaps WhatsApp messages or whatever, where you're getting direct feedback from people. Now, one of the hardest things is to actually get people on the phone to have a conversation. That's kind of the gold standard for qualitative research, is to actually spend half an hour on the phone to kind of get ideas, get insights from those target customers, the people that are in the target customer group you're going after. But it's very hard to do that. So one of the ways to convince somebody to actually show up for a phone call is to pay them. Say, we're going to give you a $100 Amazon gift card, $50 Amazon gift card for input. You can do that with email too. So one of the problems, if you just go broad and start saying, okay, anybody who volunteers, we're going to get feedback from them, you may not necessarily get the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You may not necessarily get the people you want. But if you're paying and you're incentivizing people to provide you insights, then you're more likely to get your actual target customers. Now, qualitative is the most important because it's where you start and it's where you kind of lay the field of what needs to be considered. The stage 2 is the quantitative. So this is when you typically do a survey. I'm going to talk later about different ways to quantify, but surveys are how you kind of figure out, okay, which of these things is most important and what is the relative importance to other aspects. And that's going to help you later determine what your positioning should actually be. Now, something I want to point out is that there's a limitation to the information that you can get from customers because customers only know so much. And although they may think that your product's most important because it solves A or it does B, they may not realize what you're capable of. They may not realize how you create value. So don't assume that your positioning needs to rely purely on what customers say. Sometimes it means figuring out what customers need or what their future needs will be, even if they don't realize it. Okay, so I put this as a separate category because I think it's just so important, but figuring out the level of awareness or education that the customer has. And some people, they're not even aware that they have a problem. They don't know that this is an issue, and that's where the majority of your customers may be, potential customers. They may also not even be aware of the category. So maybe you're a CRM. They don't know CRMs exist. Sometimes that's the case. Or they don't even know that term, CRM. Then there are people that are just product unaware. So they don't know about your specific brand. They don't know about your specific offering. But then there are people that are aware. So when you're a larger company, or perhaps you're in a super niche where everybody knows you, even though you're not a large company, then they're aware of your product. So the positioning will vary depending on the level of awareness that you figure out or you guess at where customers are in their kind of awareness funnel, if you will. So, for example, positioning yourself as the best CRM assumes that they know what the product category is, right? Okay, you're the best CRM. But if most people in your target customer group are not even aware that they have a problem and don't know the category CRM, positioning yourself as the best CRM is pointless. It's messaging that doesn't resonate. Now, let's say you're in a market where most people are already aware that your product exists. Then taking kind of this positioning that's trying to educate them on the product doesn't really make any sense. You gotta go deeper than that. Now, the last thing I put here is objections to buying or trying, and that's something you need to address based on customers' awareness, because they're going to have a whole series of objections to why, oh, we don't need to use that category, or we don't need to use your product, or we think that category is super expensive when actually it's not, or we think there's going to be an expensive licensing deal when actually it's just month-to-month sales, or we think we don't have a problem. Okay, we got to figure out and surface what those objections are, because hammering and addressing each of those one by one can be one of the most guaranteed ways to actually get people to act, particularly when you're doing something like a long form direct response letter, email, etc. Okay, so we've looked at the product supply, we've looked at the demand, we've looked at the level of customer awareness. Now let's analyze the competition, because the positioning you take is going to depend on how crowded the space is with your competitors, and the amount of value that you deliver is contextual and based on how much value the competing solutions have. So first thing I would do is put in the direct competitors, and these are going to be other people that basically provide the same software as you or very similar. But then there's also kind of perhaps indirect competitors. So this might be the status quo. So using spreadsheets or Excel, maybe what they're doing, they may be using pen and paper, they may be using an employee. These aren't technically direct competitors, but they're solutions that compete with yours, because people may object to using your software when they think, oh, okay, well, TED can do that, or we have Excel to do that, to do this, or we have Google Docs, which is free. Why do we need your surveying tool? Whatever. So by analyzing the competition, then we're able to go back to our product and figure out, okay, what things are actually points of difference that make us different from our competitors? What are the points of parity? So the things that we actually have very similar to our competitors, maybe we didn't realize it. Maybe we thought we were special. Turns out we're not really that special. Turns out a lot of the competitors offer what we do, and we didn't know. And then there's points of irrelevance. So there are things that your competitors highlight, and there are things that you highlight that are actually irrelevant. They're not things that customers actually care about. And in a lot of cases, actually the things that you think make you good are actually making you bad. So for example, maybe you have a very advanced integration that carries tons of information from one system to the next, and you think, wow, that's awesome. We're able to deliver everything, or we're able to offer full customization. You customize everything, but the customer is thinking, time. I want to save time. Why do I want all this information going from system A to B if that just means the processing time is going to take longer? Why do I want to do all these customizations with my Android device when I just want it to be automated? I want it to speed up the process, not slow me down. So those are things that are actually value leaks. So to some extent, they're points of irrelevance, but they're also points of negative value. All right, now another thing that I want to address here is categorization. So you need to figure out if you are a business-to-business non-strategic purchase, a business-to-business strategic purchase, a business-to-consumer purchase, or are you some sort of hybrid? And you can jot whatever notes you want into the hybrid section. So what is a business-to-business non-strategic purchase versus a business-to-business strategic purchase? This is something I've talked about in my other courses. It's something I've written about, and It's information that's based on the research of James Anderson, who is a business-to-business marketing professor from Kellogg. He's been featured in books by Harvard Business Review talking about strategic marketing. You can see Harvard Business Review articles with him talking about this. And basically, what a strategic purchase is when your product helps a company differentiate their product to their customers. Now, in cases like that, differentiation matters a lot. How you are different from your competitors really, really matters, because you are fundamentally changing how a company distinguishes itself from competitors in the market. And the example I usually cite here is Jungle Scout. Jungle Scout is software for Amazon sellers. It is a strategic purchase. The reason it's a strategic purchase is because Jungle Scout helps Amazon sellers determine what portfolio of products they need to sell to their customers. That is the fundamental variable that distinguishes one Amazon seller from another, the portfolio of products that they sell. But there are lots of things that Amazon sellers do and buy that have nothing to do with differentiating their product. So, for example, automating back-end accounting. That is not a strategic thing. That is not how one Amazon seller distinguishes themselves from another. Problem I see with SaaS a lot of the time is people behave by default because they're oblivious to the fact that there is such a thing as a non-strategic purchase. And so many SaaS are non-strategic purchases, okay? Things that automate your back-end office. Things like plugins for your website. So many of these automated SaaS offerings, plugins, integrations are non-strategic. They're not helping companies differentiate themselves. So when you're trying to market something like that, your positioning shouldn't talk about really high-level benefits like we're going to explode your growth. We're going to revolutionize your business. We're going to make you so much more money and grow your profits. That is not correct positioning. You're not at that high a level. You're a functional offering that does some operational optimization. Don't try to be something you're not. Now, the differentiation you're going to focus on is not fundamentally about your value proposition. It's going to be about things like, do you have 24-hour support? Is your sales process easy? Do you have a money-back guarantee? Is it easy to work with you? Is it easy to integrate? Is this going to be a less pain in the butt for me as a director in a Fortune 500 company to buy your solution because it's less likely to make me look bad? It's going to eat up less of my time. Those types of tactical, operational, sales process differentiators are what matter when you're selling a non-strategic purchase. Now, with business to consumer, positioning can look a lot different. Because in cases like this, things like emotion matter more. Perhaps not as much as people tend to think, as I demonstrated when I showed the research from McKinsey, but there's certainly a bigger element of psychological value with a lot of consumer products. And positioning can just move in a very different direction when you're not doing business to business. And then there's hybrid models where basically you need to position yourself to, for example, the business-to-business buyers, but position yourself differently with the business-to-consumer, perhaps through sales enablement that you provide the businesses that are buying your product and then marketing it to consumers. All sorts of considerations with hybrid models. Now, I have a category here that may be irrelevant for you, perhaps more relevant to companies that have been around for a long time, but repositioning. Now, often what you may do when you first start out, before you have tons of funding, before you go public, whatever, is you take some sort of narrow position. And then what we see with companies as they get bigger is you tend to take a broader positioning. So I just wrote some notes here about perhaps your long-term plan. Maybe you have a 10-year or 20-year plan for your business. You're planning to commit to for a long time. Let's talk about what the positioning should be now and then how you kind of see that evolving over time.
So, for example, with me, I'm right now positioned in this course as a SaaS marketing expert, which I am. However, I'm also thinking long term that I really want to transform people's lives. I really want to help people, not just with their SaaS businesses, not just with their marketing, but fundamentally with their life. How do they become a better person? But right now, I'm not positioned in that space. I'm positioned as the SaaS marketing guru. But you can see that when you're thinking about long-term horizons, your positioning can get much broader. Okay, so this loosely speaking, this is kind of like a step-by-step how you kind of hone in on your positioning. So you start with product attributes, customer needs, and then you kind of gradually move down, and then ultimately you get to prioritization. And this is where you narrow in on, a lot of cases it might be one benefit, one use case, one job to be done, or it might be a product category. Your positioning could be maybe 3 benefits, 2 benefits, a feature and a benefit, or just one feature if that feature is unique and provides a lot of value. So how you prioritize is one of the difficult strategic decisions you can make, and there are different ways to do it. The gold standard is some sort of quantification model where you've brainstormed all kind of positioning directions at the top, but then you quantify it to hone in on exactly what the positioning should be. But positioning is not just a science, it's also an art. So sometimes your positioning is just an intuitive thing. It's not necessarily a scientific, quantitative process. So one way is to start with just what is the logical positioning. Okay, you've done this brainstorming, you've done this analysis. What seems like the best fit? Another thing to do is to actually quantify each attribute that you have. Usually that's each benefit, add a financial value to it. So you automate this, you streamline that, you blah, blah, blah. Well, it may turn out that the automation of A and B saves companies $10 million a year, and the other things that you do are barely make a dent in their financials. So your positioning is probably going to be around that, around the $10 million that you save because you do this streamlining or something like that. Sometimes it's hard to do, particularly in startup. Now, if you're a mid-sized company, it's going to be pretty easy because you have a lot of case studies, you have credibility with customers, you can do case study analysis to kind of figure out, okay, how much value was created from each of the benefits you deliver, and then you can hone the positioning around the strongest financial benefit. Now, you can also quantify your attributes in non-financial ways. So it's things like how much time did this save? For example, if feature A saves you 10 hours a week, feature B saves you 20 hours a week, then positioning around feature B probably makes more sense. Or taking the positioning around time savings in general, and then just using the various features and how much time they save as a reason to believe in the positioning. Another way to quantify and prioritize to kind of hone in on your positioning is survey results. So you can go to a website like Sentiment. So what Sentiment is just a website for getting panel data. So for example, you could survey marketing directors, and you can type in who a quote request to say, okay, I want 50 responses from VPs of marketing companies with 200 plus employees in the USA, and they'll give you a quote. So you might pay, I don't know, $1,000 to survey these people in your target customer group, and then you ask them 10 questions about above to kind of figure out, okay, what actually matters the most to them, what are their biggest pain points, etc., and that can help you make a decision for your positioning. Now, if you're not that sophisticated, or you don't have that much time, or you're just too agile and you're not sure, you could rely on interview results. So just use qualitative data to make a decision on your positioning. You could use focus groups. So I've done positioning research with focus groups so for example, I did in San Diego, and then I also did in Chicago, and then kind of compared the two. We had different segments. So there were like 3 major segments that we had focus groups for to get the creative juices going among people that were in those given segments. And that helped us give an idea, not just about the positioning, but also honing in on the target customer
as well. So you can couple positioning research with marketing research or market strategy research when you're doing focus groups, because it can be pretty expensive and time consuming. You may want to kind of bundle various research together there. Now, one of the other things to do is you may have different positioning directions you want to go with a new product or a new feature, or maybe a new mobile app version of your desktop product, something like that. One way to determine the positioning is just figure out which one makes the most sense based on the wider company strategy. So that's more of an intuitive or kind of non-survey, non-research based way to determine the positioning. The other thing is just to make a very educated assumption about which attribute creates the most value for the potential buyer. And if it creates the most value, it's probably going to be the best positioning for you. Now, the last way that I have here to prioritize, figure out what your positioning is ultimately, is empirical test results. So you can do things like A/B tests with your email through something like Lemlist, or MailChimp if you're targeting existing people in your database. You can do empirical tests with Google ads, with LinkedIn ads, with Facebook ads. You could do tests through surveys. You could do tests through behaviors. You could do field tests where you're actually putting different positioning, packaging into the market, into stores, and see which ones people buy. You could do it in digital marketplaces, like maybe run, it's not going to be an exact A/B test because app marketplaces aren't going to let you do that. But you could say, okay, we're going to run this one for a week, another one for a week. And assuming there's no huge difference between those weeks, you can say, oh, well, we got much more results from the app listing that focused on X than we did with Y. So that would be an empirical way to determine your positioning.
Your list. Your list is arguably the most important element in acquiring new customers. But many marketers don't have a list at all, let alone a good list. What they do instead is come up with vague definitions of the target customer using personas. For example, here you can see frugal Farah, a hypothetical persona that is supposed to represent the typical buyer. There are a few big problems with using these types of personas. First, this kind of targeting just isn't concrete. It's theoretical. It's actually possible to go out and find the names of the buyers you want. So why are you relying on an imaginary concept when concrete data are available? Go and find the actual names of the actual people who might buy your product. You're much more likely to acquire customers after you've identified real people. Second, these personas are often based on spurious data. Is the average age actually 26? Are most buyers actually female? And is Spain your largest market? Third, demographic data like sex and age are often irrelevant. If 55% of your buyers are female versus 45% male, who cares? All this tells me is that sex does not matter. Of course it matters when you're selling something like lingerie, but not when you're selling software or pencils. These kind of variables do matter when they relate to how buyers will use your product and extract value from it. Here's the best approach. You have a spreadsheet like this one I created using Google Sheets. You see the name of an actual person, her phone number, her mailing address, her email, her title, and details about her company like revenue. This is the key to acquiring new customers. Instead of living in the world of hypothetical ideas about who might buy your product, you have actual data on actual people. You should have a long list of thousands of potential buyers for your product. Now you can start testing in the real world to see if real people will give you real money for your product. If they don't, then you can ask real people why they don't care about what you're selling. This is where the rubber hits the road, where you can start communicating real value and see if people are actually willing to pay for it. So where do you get a list like this? There are different ways, some free, some not. It's up to you to decide whether you'd rather invest time or invest money.
You can find a list for free, buy a list outright, rent a list from someone like an influencer, compile a list by doing research, or build a list from scratch. Whatever approach you use, you'll be leaps ahead of most marketers who don't have a list at all. They often go straight into advertising without the pinpoint targeting that you can get from having a list. That's why they can waste boatloads of money on advertising, because they haven't actually identified their target customers in a concrete way. Before I get into the details of these different approaches, I want to point out a few things. First is that you do not need to generate leads. Often marketers spend a ton of time and a ton of money generating leads by creating landing pages, Google Ads, and lead magnets, such as white papers, that are designed to capture people's email addresses. Yes, you can do this, but generating leads is expensive and time-consuming. Instead of spending your time on generating leads, you should be spending your time getting leads to buy your product. That's the hard part that many people avoid. Instead, they keep themselves busy with so-called lead generation, or what I like to call procrastination. I call it procrastination because the real hard work is selling your product, not capturing emails from people who can be sold to. So before you go and spend a lot of time and money generating leads, consider just buying leads. Bam! Within a few days, you could have a list of 10,000 potential buyers for your product. Wasn't that easy? No white papers, no Google Ads, no LinkedIn targeting, or any of that. You just pay for a list that meets the criteria you're looking for, and you get it almost immediately. Then you can focus on the real hard job of marketing and selling to those potential buyers. Now let's get into the different approaches to getting a list. First, you can go out and find a list. You can start by just doing a Google search. Here I looked for a list of architects. This is what popped up. A list of architecture firms provided freely by an architecture association. Whoever your target customer is, you can do this. You can find a list of accountants, naturopaths, software startups, etc. It gets a bit complicated when your list has something sensitive like people with certain diseases. So for those, you may need to actually buy a list. Here's another example of a free list of SaaS companies that could potentially buy your product. You can even get detailed information like the number of employees and the company's specific location. Another way to get your list is just to buy it outright from some organizations such as a list broker. This is the simplest, most straightforward approach. Again, ask yourself the question, why spend time and money on lead generation if I can just buy the leads? One of the largest suppliers of purchase list is the Info Group. You may know them by one of their sub-brands, such as Info USA. Here you can see some of the criteria you can use to build your list, such as location, housing information, and financial data. You can achieve a high degree of granularity for precise targeting. This will prevent you from wasting money marketing to people who will never buy from you. Here are some even more specific lists. You can specifically target dentists if you're selling dental tools or dental marketing services. Other lists are built around key triggers, such as bankruptcy. You can target people who went bankrupt, as this bankruptcy may trigger those people to start looking for a product like yours. You could also target people who moved into a new home, as they may be particularly interested in your furniture or perhaps your insurance. It's important to remember that the customer journey usually begins with some sort of trigger that happens in the buyer's life that instigates the buying process. The buying process does not begin with awareness, it begins with triggers. If you market to them when that trigger happens, you are highly likely to get the sale. Dun & Bradstreet is another popular supplier of marketing lists. Hoover's is one of their sub-brands. Here you can see other suppliers who are listed as competitors of one another, such as Owler, Equifax, Infogroup, Experian, TransUnion, Traxon, PitchBook, and InsideView. That was an overview of some of the biggest list suppliers. But in niche markets, you may want to consider niche list providers. These specialized lists often perform better. Pipe Candy, for example, provides a list of e-commerce sellers. Here, you can segment the different types of e-commerce sellers by technology. Specialized list sellers often have higher quality lists because they understand the niche market better. There are lots of people out there trying to sell lists. I often get email solicitations from people in India, for example, to buy lists related to my industry. Don't treat those emails as spam, as I have had some success relying on these lists for marketing campaigns. In some ways, they are doing a favor by bringing specialized lists to your attention without you needing to go seek them. Remember to negotiate. There are lots of people out there trying to sell your lists, and you don't owe them anything. Consider getting prices from multiple suppliers and use those prices to give you negotiating power. If their list is already built, the marginal cost to sell to you should not be very high, so they will have a lot of room for negotiating price. Instead of renting a list, you could compile one. Here, for example, you could find someone on Craigslist in the Philippines to build a list for you. You could also hire someone using Fiverr. Upwork is another great way to find contractors for list compiling. You could also compile a list by doing searches yourself or paying someone to do it for you. For example, you could simply search on Google for DJs if they were your potential buyers. You could search on Facebook for fans of a particular band. Instagram could help you find people with certain interests. Twitch could help you find people with specific video game preferences. And lastly, you could find people who belong to certain groups on LinkedIn. The final way to construct your list is to build it from scratch. Many people default to this option without first considering other options such as buying a list. In reality, building a list is just one of many options, and it's the hardest and longest to do. But it does have benefits, such as building a captivated audience that will stick with you in the long run. As the saying goes, the money is in the list, and if you built a list from the ground up, it could become increasingly more valuable over time. The easiest way to build your list is to give something in exchange for contact information. You could treat this like a transaction. If you want a prospect to give you his or her contact information, you better give them something quite valuable in exchange. Perhaps something they couldn't easily find by searching on Google or elsewhere. What you give them is called a lead magnet. Lead magnets are for capturing leads. They don't necessarily convert people into customers, but they capture their contact information so that you can potentially sell them something in the future. Let's look at some examples of lead magnets. Here are some church bulletins you might get in exchange for your name and email. This report and audio file show you how to build a six-figure blogging business. Here, you get 5 free meal plans. This cheat sheet reveals the secret to amazing SEO performance. Note the excellent copywriting that proves the seller knows what he is talking about. Here, Neil Patel is focusing on selling the outcome, a $4 million business. This is essentially the promise. In order to achieve that outcome, you need to click the call to action. Often the best marketing materials are those that focus on the results rather than on the product or the offer itself. Checklists make for great lead magnets. This one gives you a list of what you need to do to launch your course. This lead magnet gives you a one-page marketing plan in exchange for your name and email. The last example I want to show you is one of my favorites. Here, you have to provide your personal details to see your results. I assume that this is for something like a personality test. You will fill out a survey to reveal what kind of person you are, and at the end of the survey, you need to input your data to get the results. Lead magnets like these are particularly effective because the user has already invested in getting the results, because they spent time filling out the survey. They're already committed. The most popular lead magnets are things like ebooks and white papers. But because these are so common, people often don't value them, and hence their effectiveness goes down. Ebooks are particularly challenging because people who have no relationship with you aren't usually interested in reading a long report. They would prefer something short and actionable. Later, they may be interested in your book, but in the early stages, they want a low commitment offering. Here I want to summarize some lead magnets that are not as obvious as ebooks and white papers. The first is the checklist. People value actionable items like these. Similarly, workbooks, such as those that help you build a personalized diet, can be effective. A cheat sheet is great because it provides a lot of value to the user without a lot of commitment on their part. In other words, they don't need to spend hours reading it. Templates are great because they aren't readily available in books or blog posts. So users are more likely to give up their email in exchange for something rare. The last point I want to make is that unique lead magnets may be the most effective. If you call your lead magnet a white paper or consultation, it will be perceived as generic and less valuable. But something like an early retirement planning session or a 30-day guide to mastering WordPress is specific and communicates a specific benefit or promise. These are the kinds of lead magnets that generate high response rates. One big thing to note is that not all leads are created equally. Just because you captured more leads doesn't mean you captured better leads. One way to improve the quality rather than the quantity of your leads is to use lead magnets that are closely tied to the problem your product solves. For example, a thought leadership lead magnet such as the future of e-commerce might generate a lot of leads, but because it's generic, few people might actually be interested in your product. So you're wasting time nurturing the wrong kinds of leads. Consider a more specific lead magnet such as the 2020 guide to the best WordPress e-commerce plugins. If you're selling a WordPress e-commerce plugin, then this kind of lead magnet makes perfect sense for your audience. Instead of buying a list, it's possible to do what I call renting. For example, I was once a paying member of the Vancouver Board of Trade. Part of my membership gave me the right to send an e-blast to all the other members. You can see there the distribution size and average performance metrics of these e-blasts. This is an example of what I would call renting a list, but as a member of an association, you will likely also get access to a list of all the members anyways that you can add to your database. For example, if you sell to roofers, join the Roofers Association even if you are not a roofer yourself, because it could give you access to a list. Another example of renting a list would be talking to an influential instructor on Udemy. This guy, for example, influences people who are interested in day trading. If you sell a related product, consider paying him a flat fee or commission for promoting your product to his email list. You can also find influencers on Amazon or Audible. This author, for example, influences people who are into nutrition. You could talk to her to see if you might be able to pay her for an e-blast promoting some of the content that you produced. YouTube personalities are another great source for rented lists. Here are a couple of people who influence e-commerce entrepreneurs. They likely have mailing lists of these entrepreneurs. I did a search on Instagram for vegan, and this account showed up. Instagram is a great place to find co-marketing opportunities. Of course, Facebook is also helpful. Search for topics that your target customer is interested in. Look for the leaders of the groups related to those topics. If you're selling to graphic designers, for example, solicit the admins for these groups to see if they could promote your message for a fee. They may not be comfortable trying to sell your product directly, so consider having them promote a blog post of yours that turns into a sales pitch further down the page. That way the promotion is informative instead of just being salesy. You can also find influencers on LinkedIn by searching for keywords and the individuals or groups that pop up. Here's an example of a potential influencer in the vegan space. There are lots of software companies popping up that help identify, hire, and communicate with influencers. I'd only use these if you really have a marketing plan focused on working with a bunch of influencers over time. Upfluence is one example. Clear is another example where you can access a database of influencers. Another option is to build partnerships with companies. You can build into your contract co-marketing opportunities, such as renting each other's list for emails. Imagine gaining access to the trusted customers of a company much larger than yours. To wrap up, here are a few key things to remember. You want to obtain a list of the exact people you are targeting, instead of creating fictitious personas. To obtain this list, there are 5 primary approaches. 1. You can find a list for free by searching on Google or wherever. There are a lot of lists already freely available on the internet from associations and groups. 2. You can buy a list from a list broker or some other supplier. 3. You can rent a list, for example, by working with an influencer and having him or her deliver your content to their followers. 4. You can compile a list, for example, by hiring someone on Craigslist to collect data from different sources. 5. And lastly, you can build a list from scratch by using lead magnet.
Latch onto larger companies. This is one of the most important opportunities that marketers miss because they're so focused on the target customer that they miss target partners, collaborators. Recognize that your target market isn't just customers, but also the partners you choose to work with. That means that choosing partners is a strategic decision, not just a small tactical consideration. One of the main reasons I recommend working with larger companies is because you need to stop doing everything from scratch. Working from scratch gives you very little leverage, and it's a slow process filled with mistakes and wrong turns. You can bypass all of this by latching on to partners. A single partnership with a large company can generate more customers than 10 years worth of demand generation. So be wise about how you spend your time. One example is to work with publishers such as Penguin in the book industry or EA in the video game industry. This gives you access to larger resources and connections to make your new product a success. Why market your product yourself when you could piggyback off of larger publishers? Another example is to publish on a platform such as the Chrome Web Store. There are lots of successful apps on here that you may have never even heard of, but they were very successful because they latched onto an existing marketplace for apps. Jungle Scout is one company that had a lot of success early on by promoting a Chrome Web Store app. Ask yourself, am I better off selling this product on my own or optimizing it to be sold on an existing platform with a steady flow of potential buyers? Licensing your royalties is another popular approach that's used by inventors. A great book further details this, called One Simple Idea, which outlines the process of buying a patent pending for your product and then soliciting potential companies to sell them the rights to use that patent pending. This gives you tremendous leverage. Another angle is to work with large retailers such as Amazon or Walmart. Many of the most successful e-commerce companies don't actually have their own e-commerce stores. They just sell on Amazon and master the art of search engine optimization on Amazon, getting reviews, and finding missed opportunities for new products or for retail arbitrage. Similarly, you can sell in Walmart stores or on Walmart.com. Getting into big stores means you don't have to do the work of acquiring customer traffic to your own store or website. Steam is a great marketplace if you sell video games. Consider self-publishing here.
Winning a large RFP, request for proposal, is one way to catapult yourself to success. A single big contract with the government could generate a year's worth of revenue. The best part is that these RFPs are usually publicly listed for you to bid on. You might also be solicited to respond to a large company's request for proposals. Make sure you invest a lot of time tailoring your proposals to their needs, as these big contracts are well worth the effort. App stores are a great opportunity, as these are relatively new compared to other platforms like Google. Don't just limit yourself to Apple and Google, however. Consider Intuit's apps.com, where you can see a number of apps that latch onto the Intuit ecosystem. Salesforce has a similar ecosystem that you can tap into. I know several highly successful software businesses built on selling through the Salesforce App Exchange. Udemy is another good platform to set your product up for success. So too are e-commerce sites such as Etsy, shown here, and Alibaba.com. One of the reasons I highly recommend selling on these platforms is because App Store optimization is usually quite easy. Search engine optimization for Google has gotten very sophisticated over the years and takes a lot of time and effort. But the search engine algorithms for these platforms are not nearly as sophisticated as Google's, so it's quite easy to show up on the first page for keywords if you invest time in writing keyword-dense titles, subtitles, and body copy, or simply drumming up more reviews by soliciting your customer base. That kind of marketing doesn't cost a single cent. Your pipeline is the steps involved in converting a prospective buyer into a paying customer. You need to have a detailed understanding of how this works if you're going to generate a lot of new customers. The first thing to recognize is that not all prospects are the same. They're coming to you with varying degrees of urgency and familiarity with what you offer. That, in turn, means that not all the leads are the same. Often marketers and salespeople shout that they want more leads, but there are so many different types of leads, so it's not really clear what they mean. That's why we need definitions in order to categorize the different types of leads. Someone who downloads your white paper might be a lead, but that doesn't mean they're anywhere close to wanting to buy your product. So don't push them for a sale until they're ready. On the other hand, when a lead starts asking specific technical questions about your product, they're probably closer to making a purchase. In situations like this, do not slow them down by forcing them through a fixed sales process. Dive straight into those technical questions to help them with their research. You need different terms to refer to these different types of prospects. On the right, you can see 3 examples. One person is just browsing and won't be receptive to an aggressive sales pitch. Another needs a solution urgently because their problem is unbearable. The third person is still doing research with other decision makers in the company and might be making a purchase in a couple of months. Recognize that companies define the stages in the pipeline differently. You're welcome to customize definitions to fit your process. I'll walk you through the typical pipeline stages by using the framework provided by saasmql.com. First, I'll give an overview of the stages and then go into more detail on each. Pipeline starts with MCLs, or marketing captured leads. These leads then become MELs, or marketing engaged leads. Next come MQLs, marketing qualified leads. The leads then move to the sales team where they become SALs, sales accepted leads, then SQLs, sales qualified leads. Lastly, sales qualified opportunities are converted into paying customers. Note that the word opportunity has a specific definition in the context of pipeline management. It means a highly qualified lead that is likely to become a customer. Throughout this process, these different types of leads are nurtured through various means, such as Facebook advertising and marketing emails. If a lead doesn't become an opportunity, then it is recycled and continues to be nurtured. The first stage in the pipeline is MCL, which stands for Marketing Captured Leads. These are all the contacts in your database, including cold leads from lists you purchase. Marketing captured leads do not need to be aware of your brand. Next is MELs, or Marketing Engaged Leads. These are contacts who perform some action with your content, such as signing up for a webinar. MQLs, or Marketing Qualified Leads, are probably the most important types of leads. These are the leads that are assigned to the sales team. Usually these are leads who requested a hard offer, such as a consultation or a phone call. MQLs are very valuable and are usually what people mean when they use the generic term lead. SAL stands for Sales Accepted Leads. These are leads that the sales reps want to follow up on. Sales Qualified Leads are leads that have begun a conversation with sales. They picked up the phone when the sales rep called, for example. Sales Qualified Opportunities are leads that are engaged with the sales team and have been assigned to pipeline revenue. This means that a particular dollar value becomes associated with the lead because there is a reasonable probability of this prospect becoming a customer in the near future. The final stage is becoming a paying customer, hopefully a loyal one who doesn't abandon your product and goes on to refer your company to their colleagues. Okay, so why do we have so many stages? Why not a minimalist approach? Because the granularity gives us advantages. You can identify bottlenecks in your pipeline at any given lead stage. Maybe not enough engaged leads are becoming MQLs. You can identify whether your problem is primarily one of conversion or one of lead volume. If MQLs drop, and so too do engaged leads, then the problem is probably the volume of engaged leads. Tracking conversion from one lead to another also helps you make HR decisions, such as which salesperson should be promoted or who should be training others. This sophisticated pipeline also helps you make decisions about the content or sales enablement you need. For example, if you have a ton of engaged leads but few MQLs, then you need more content centered on pushing your hard offers. Lastly, tracking pipeline stages lets you decide where to focus your time. Perhaps you really just need to buy a bigger list of MCLs instead of spending time trying to get an extra 0.5% conversion lift. There are three big mistakes that happen with the pipeline. The first is focusing too much on the top of the funnel, or in other words, focusing too much on marketing captured leads. Generating a ton of MCLs is pointless if you can't effectively engage them and convert them into customers. You're just shoving more leads into a leaky bucket. Many of the people at the top of the funnel may never actually end up buying because your sales process can't effectively convert them. Content marketers often get excited about creating thought leadership content, but often this is just too high level to help sales in any meaningful way, at least in the short term. If you need more sales this month, then you're better off focusing on lead engagement than on lead generation. On the flip side, you can focus too much on the bottom of the funnel. A lot of these people are going to buy from you, even if your sales team barely speaks to them. Obsessing over the bottom of the funnel is sometimes an attribution error. An account executive is given credit for converting the lead into a customer, but in reality, it was all the effort at the top and middle of the funnel that really converted that person into a customer. By obsessing over the bottom of the funnel, you're trading short-term gain for long-term pain. You may need to start building the top of the funnel lead list now so that you'll get new customers in a month or two. The third big mistake is ignoring the middle of the funnel. This is where you create and nurture marketing engaged leads. Often this is the place where you can actually make a material difference. In other words, the effort you put into the middle of the funnel actually makes the difference between someone buying from you and not buying from you. Tactically, this means creating content such as case studies and emailing these to prospects. One of the biggest keys to success with your pipeline is to nurture your leads extensively. The easiest way to do this is by sending emails out automatically using programs such as Marketo, HubSpot, or MailChimp. Advertising case studies, infographics, free demos, and other offers also help nurture leads. You can input your lead lists into Facebook and LinkedIn and hit your targets with ads. Retargeting people who visit your website is another good approach. Direct mail is one of the most overlooked ways to nurture leads. Send out a handwritten note or box of giveaways to a high-value prospect. You should also consider SMS texting, as open rates are much higher than they are with email. As your lead nurturing gets more sophisticated, you'll want to put people into nurture streams based on their behavior. For example, look at the white paper on the right. Consider if someone becomes a lead because they downloaded this white paper. You'll want to send them follow-up emails talking about AI. If someone downloaded a white paper on advertising, send them a request for an advertising consultation. Customize your nurture streams based on the needs the prospect has. They don't really care about you and your company. They care about whatever it is that they downloaded. To conclude, you want a sophisticated pipeline built around granular stages. Do not ignore the middle of the funnel because it's arguably the area where you can make the biggest impact in marketing. Don't spend too much time at the top of the funnel because a leaky bucket doesn't need more water. And don't spend too much time on the bottom of the funnel. This is because bottom of funnel outcomes are often the result of middle of funnel causes. Your customer journey. One of the most important ways to acquire customers is by empathizing with them and understanding the journey they are going through. Unfortunately, many marketers assume that customers all go through this journey in the same way and that it begins with awareness and ends with purchase. I'll show you why this isn't true. The first thing I need to point out is that the customer journey is not just some interesting theoretical framework. It gives you real actionable advice, such as what content you need to create. Content is important at all stages of marketing, including generating leads, nurturing leads, and converting leads into paying customers. The customer journey also tells you where to distribute content. It tells you how to advertise. It tells you how to bypass competitors, and it tells you what influencers you should be partnering with. Lastly, and most importantly, the customer journey tells you how to acquire new customers. The reality is that most companies don't understand the journey that their customers go through. They make tons of assumptions that don't align at all with reality. As a result, they force their customers through a homogeneous linear path. Customers really don't like this, and that's why so many lost leads end up going dark and ceasing communication. They become irritated with sales. Why? Because sales doesn't understand them. They treat the customer like everybody else, and they either pressure the customers to move too quickly or too slowly. And then sales becomes irritated with marketing, thinking the leads aren't very good. What ends up happening is that only a tiny fraction of the leads end up becoming closed customers. These are the hot leads, the leads that probably would have bought anyways without much interference from marketing or sales. A huge fraction of potential buyers never end up making a purchase. That's because they're turned off by an overzealous sales team. If marketing understood the customer journey better, then they'd send leads to sales at the right time and give the sales team the proper sales enablement. The solution here is to understand the actual customer journey. The old understanding of the customer journey looks something like this: awareness, consideration, and purchase. In other words, the customer becomes aware of you, considers your product, and then buys it. This is somewhat of an archaic framework. The new customer journey looks like this one presented by McKinsey. This is a generic customer journey for B2C products. The process begins with some sort of trigger that instigates the buying process. This might be something negative like divorce or bankruptcy, or something good like a wedding or a surge in sales. The customer then looks to an initial consideration set, perhaps a few brands they knew from TV ads. They then start actively researching solutions, wherein they may learn about your brand. Then there's a moment of purchase, perhaps on a marketplace, app store, or in a physical store. They then derive value from your product and form opinions about your customer service that hopefully prompt them to buy again and refer your product to others. The B2B customer journey looks somewhat similar. First, a trigger prompts the buying process. Then they identify possible solutions and start researching and evaluating options. They may then solicit a few providers to submit a formal proposal based on an RFP. A purchase decision is then made by various decision makers in the company. If the switching costs are high and the experience is smooth, the company will remain loyal and make repeat purchases. So that's what the customer journeys look like. But so what? What does this mean for you? It means you now know how to put a marketing plan together. For example, let's start with the triggers. If the trigger is a recommendation from an IT consultant, then you can create a blog for IT consultants, such as what online chat software to recommend to WordPress clients. If the trigger is outgrowing current software, then your content may be an article comparing software solutions for mid-sized companies looking for a new ERP. If the trigger was a policy change, consider cold emails about what to do now that Amazon has banned certain types of products. You can create content for each stage of the customer journey just like this, tailoring it to the customer's needs. You might discover, for example, that a lot of your customers compare you to two major competitors in the research stage. If that is the case, prepare a graphic email detailing why your solution is better than those competitors. Another thing this customer journey tells us is that the initial consideration set comes before active evaluation. So your prospects are already considering competitors before they've even begun their research. This means you need to meet them where they're at. At the back of their minds, they're defaulting to a competing brand. So when you produce marketing materials, you need to use this as the baseline. Don't assume you're on an equal footing with competitors. Aggressively push why your product produces better outcomes. One of the most useful applications of the customer journey is in the creation of lead generation content. Here I'm listing out the 10 types of demand gen content as detailed by the Spear Marketing Group. These can be customized based on your customer's journey. Your videos, for example, might center on a common trigger at the beginning of the journey or on a competitive product comparison at the research stage. The 10 types of demand gen content are infographics, free trials, free consultations, white papers and ebooks, webinars, case studies, videos, surveys, buyer's guides, and ROI calculators. I'd also add research and various types of tools, including quizzes and surveys. Ideally, you'll have an internal customer journey map. The way you might create this is by looking through the notes in your CRM, such as Salesforce. See what customers talk about in the initial sales conversations. If they mention a competitor, write it down. If they mention their accountant, write it down. If they talk about Google search or LinkedIn conversations, note these as well. You want to form a picture of the process they go through. Here's how you approach the journey mapping. Start with triggers. What event happened in their company or personal life that made them seek a solution or change? Initial consideration set. What brands did they have in mind before they began researching? Active evaluation. How did they do their research? Did they talk to consultants or rely solely on Google? Moment of purchase. Did they buy from an app store, go directly to your site, search on Amazon, or walk to a convenience store? Did someone else buy for them? Abandonment. What prompted them to leave? Was this something you could fix, or was it inevitable, like a bankruptcy? To summarize, the customer journey tells you when to intercept to acquire customers. It requires a lot of empathy and the ability to treat customers differently.
Direct mail sounds archaic, but it's actually making a resurgence lately with account-based marketing. One of the reasons for this resurgence is the decline in email effectiveness. Open rates are low, and even those low open rates that you do see are usually overestimated. It's much easier to get someone to open or see your message when you send direct mail. People receive tons and tons of emails, but less and less physical mail. One of the easiest forms of direct mail is handwritten letters. You can pay companies to write you letters promoting your free demo, or to test drive your car, or whatever it is that your hard offer is. This kind of personalized message really gets noticed. Bulky packages also get noticed. Things like fruit baskets, books, promotional shirts, and big boxes. These are less likely to get thrown out by secretaries. The example here is from SAS MQL,
one of the leaders in direct mail, demand generation, and ABM, account-based marketing. As with all direct response marketing, the key to success with direct mail is to focus on the offer. In some cases, your direct mail might focus on something like giving away a free iPad in exchange for doing a product demo. If you're trying to get the attention of a C-level executive, this just might work. Of course, it only makes sense if your product is very expensive, because iPads aren't cheap. So what this means is that when you're selling an expensive product, you can afford to also offer an expensive offer to entice people to become interested in your more expensive product. Another thing to consider is that generating MQLs is not cheap. You have spent a lot of money on advertising, lead nurturing, etc. to get people to take your hard offer. Consider just paying for people to take you up on the hard offer, either in the form of a gift card or a gift. Remember that the message in your direct mail needs to center on the offer, not the product. You want to move people along the demand funnel, not send them directly to the end where they make a purchase. Focus on getting that phone call or meeting and then sell them later. Talk less about your company and product and more about the benefits of the consultation, demo, or whatever the offer is. The last thing I want to point out is that direct mail is scalable thanks to new technology available from companies like Sendoso. For example, you can set up triggers in Salesforce to send direct mail to prospective clients at key points on their customer journey.
Viral content sounds like a cheesy way to acquire customers, but it's actually quite credible. I'll walk you through how to approach this marketing technique. The approach many people take with content marketing is to create a calendar and constantly produce content. For example, a company might release 10 videos, but each video might only generate around 100 views. Often a better use of your time is to focus on one really high-quality video that generates tens of thousands of views. If this video goes viral, you'll have an exponential return on investment. Very few pieces of content generate a high number of shares, so you should focus on quality rather than quantity. If the majority of shares and views skew towards a small handful pieces of content, then focus on creating something with viral potential. A couple of examples are depicted on the right. One is a video of a molding burger. This shocking advertisement generates tons of PR. Similarly, the Will It Blend video series generated tons of buzz for its hilarious shock appeal. Virality doesn't just happen randomly. There's actually a science to creating viral content. You may already be familiar with this from the book Contagious by Wharton professor Jonah Berger. Depicted here are the 6 key principles that drive virality. 1. Social currency. In other words, people share things that make them seem smart and helpful, things that make them look better than their friends and colleagues. 2. Triggers. People share things that they remember based on triggers. For example, the medicine Robitussin tried to associate their product with coughs. So every time people cough, they think of the Robitussin brand. The cough is the trigger. Emotion. People share emotional content. Consider, for example, creating a viral video based on the emotional journey of one of your customers, from rags to riches. Public. People share things that are public. The Apple logo, for example, appears on the outside of the laptop, where other people see it as social proof of its quality. Plugins and add-ons that carry a brand logo are more likely to get shared and spoken about. Practical value. Useful things get shared. If your piece of content is educational and solves a problem, it is more likely to get shared. Lastly, stories. People think in terms of narratives. This is just how our minds operate. So if you can package your content into a story, it may go viral. For example, when you put a presentation on SlideShare, consider pitching it as a story rather than just a series of facts. Begin with the problem, the conflict, and then the resolution. When you create viral content, you do not need to use all of these principles. Focus on a handful that makes sense for your market. Here are a few more examples to help you come up with viral ideas. An emotional, inspiring video that tells the story of one of your customers achieving his lifelong dream. A website add-on that always displays your logo. A tip sheet that people want to share because it makes them seem smart and helpful. A humorous demonstration of your product's benefits, similar to BlendTech with its Will It Blend videos. Another way to create viral content is to talk about extreme cases. For example, one of my most popular blog posts was the best accounting website I had ever seen. I didn't talk about a good website or a great website. Instead, I talked about the best website ever. You could also do the opposite by talking about the absolute worst. One of the keys to success with viral content is tactical copywriting. Adjectives are particularly important in driving interest. They may seem superfluous at first, but they're actually important to stimulate curiosity and emotion. Here's a good example. I saw a promotion recently for an interview with Jay Abram. I never heard of this guy before, but what caught my attention was this line, the highest paid marketing consultant. I get the opportunity to listen to advice from the highest paid marketing consultant in the world. Wow, seems interesting now. This guy did an excellent job with positioning himself through copywriting.
Before you go out and spend a lot of time and money on advertising, social media, and SEO, stop and consider what the most cost-effective techniques might be. I spoke to a vice president of marketing at Disney. He told me that the single cheapest way to acquire new customers was through key influencers. Today, the word influencer brings to mind Instagram fashion celebrities, but the term actually has a much broader meaning. To me, an influencer is a person or organization that influences your target customer. In other words, they are an authority figure or trusted advisor for a certain audience. I've had a lot of success with influencer marketing. When I was a global marketing manager for PlayStation, one of the biggest influencers in the gaming space reviewed one of my products. Here you can see that PewDiePie's video generated almost 15 million views. You can see the kind of leverage you get from working with influencers. In one marketing campaign, I hired about a dozen influencers to broadcast videos of my product simultaneously. I was able to acquire users for as cheap as 10 cents each. The way I optimized this campaign was by giving each influencer a unique code to sign up new users. I was then able to track the performance of each to see which influencer actually had the most influence. This proves just how cost-effective the influencer marketing campaign can be. I mentioned before that the word influencer today is most strongly associated with lifestyle influencers on social media. But I want to broaden the definition using these examples. Consultants, accountants, and lawyers are among the most common influencers, particularly when you target audiences small business owners or entrepreneurs. Although they aren't necessarily celebrities, these trusted advisors carry a lot of persuasive power. Developers and web designers carry similar authority because business owners rely on them for technical expertise that they lack. So if you want to gain trust with business owners, it's often best to go through these intermediaries. If the web developer or consultant trusts you, then the business owner likely will as well. Twitch streamers carry credibility with gamers, and Instagram celebrities carry weight with socialites. Reddit moderators are a great resource for niche audiences. The best thing about working with Reddit influencers is the cascade effect. The people dominating the Reddit forums are sometimes influencers of early adopters, who, in turn, influence other people. Facebook group admins are another way to gain access to niche audiences. YouTube is often the first place I go to find an influencer. Try searching on YouTube for the keyword associated with the position you want in the market. Bloggers for topics like travel or product management influence the audiences in their newsletters, as well as through generic SEO traffic that they generate. A lot of marketers try to go after the end users, but often it's easier to focus your attention on the presidents of associations. By focusing your attention here, you may gain the attention of the entire association.
There's a certain credibility that goes along with publishing a book, so you may want to consider working with Amazon authors. Not only do they have mailing lists, but their book alone gives them credibility that you can leverage to acquire new customers. Lastly, I want to point out that organizations and companies, or any brand, can operate as an influencer. In the tech space, for example, Google and Facebook have very strong influence. Small business owners are heavily influenced by companies such as Intuit. Consumer packaged goods companies will listen if Procter & Gamble tells them to do something. The source of influence is not always an individual, but sometimes it's a brand that is not tied to a specific personality. The key question to ask is, who already influences your target customers? Who do they trust? Who do they listen to? Who do they subscribe to? Who do they follow? It is more efficient to deliver your message through someone who already has a following or platform than it is to build an audience from the ground up. One way to work with influencers is by developing a partner program. For example, you might offer 15% recurring revenue to people who endorse your product. You could also give them exclusive research from your internal data and offer them co-marketing opportunities, such as guest blog posts and emails. Consider what you can offer that will make your partner program enticing enough. Another way to work with influencers is by providing them free samples. Here, for example, I mailed a copy of my book to the United Kingdom so that this YouTuber would review it. I earned over 3,000 views from the single video, and I didn't even have to make it myself. This shows the power of leveraging people with existing audiences. You can invite influencers to speak on your podcast. If you don't have a podcast already, you can set one up easily on Anchor. Create a cover art design using Canva for free and go to town. You can also ask if you can be a guest speaker on their podcast. It might be best to start with smaller influencers first and then work your way up. This will give you a portfolio of content, and it will set a precedent for larger influencers to work with you. You can also be a guest on their webinars. Pitch them on an interesting topic for which you have proprietary data or information, and explain how you have specialized knowledge about an emerging topic or a trending topic. The example here is Shopify's published webinars. You can also invite influencers to your webinar or to your YouTube channel. Consider offering them commission when people sign up for your product. Make sure to give the influencer a unique URL so that you can track their performance. One of the easiest ways to build trust with an influencer is by contributing to their blog. Start with a single blog post and then offer more over time. As you build the relationship, you can start working on higher value content, such as webinars. A single blog post can get your foot in the door. Now, the key question is, how do you find these influencers? There are different ways. One of the simplest is just to search for a keyword on Amazon. Here I found an author who you might consider an influencer in the vegan market. You can also do searches on YouTube, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Udemy. Also look for associations and identify their presidents, executives, and board directors. Facebook group leaders carry similar credibility. Quora is another great place. Look for people who comment on a particular topic and tend to get a lot of engagement on their answers. Stack Overflow is great if you're marketing an API or some other business-to-developer product. Searching on Reddit is also quite fruitful. You may also want to consider locating influencers using software, such as Upfluence, or finding popular blogs or publications. An example would be Seeking Alpha in the investing market. Searching on Twitch is a great way if you're selling a game or product that gamers would like. Here, you can search on YouTube for the keyword Buddhism if you're selling a meditation recording or yoga product. In this example, I searched on Facebook for the keyword SaaS to identify groups that carry weight in this industry. Your hard offer. One of the most important elements in acquiring new customers is your hard offer. You need to spend a lot of time thinking about what hard offer will help you convert prospects into paying customers. The key to success with direct response marketing is to promote your offer rather than your product. Before we talk about what a hard offer is, let's start with soft offers. These are more common types of offers. Examples include a white paper, infographic, guide, video, or something like a free iPad. Here's a specific example from Zach's. In exchange for your email address, you get a list of 7 stocks that may be good investments. The primary purpose of a soft offer is usually to capture your contact information. Sometimes soft offers are used to nurture leads, to help push the potential buyer closer to actually buying a product. Let's contrast these soft offers with hard offers. Hard offers are things that are given to people who are very close to buying from you. For expensive products, hard offers are usually what trigger assignment to a sales rep. These are more common in B2B, but also occur with B2C for expensive products like cars and houses. For low-priced products, hard offers are often what trigger more aggressive marketing to get you to buy something. This is more common in B2C, but it also happens with low-ticket B2B products. Here are some specific examples of hard offers: a consultation, phone call, free trial, free sample, demo, a copy review, an audit, assessment, a free quote, or an online chat with the sales team. The example on the left is a free consultation with a doctor. This is a typical hard offer. The problem with hard offers is that they're often perceived as just a conversation with sales, a sales conversation in disguise. So prospects often don't like the idea of booking a consultation. Unique offers can generate better responses. Things like a free website audit or a retirement planning session sound like they provide more value than something like a generic consultation. As I mentioned, your hard offer is usually what triggers assignment to a sales rep or consultant. What this effectively means is that an MQL, or marketing qualified lead, is generated. Soft offers generate marketing captured leads and marketing engaged leads, but hard offers generate marketing qualified leads. The true test of your ability to generate leads is really generating MQLs. MCLs can be bought, and MELs can be manipulated by changing the lead scoring algorithm. But it's difficult to fake MQLs. Your MQL is therefore one of the primary key performance indicators. It's what the rest of the company is actually looking for from the marketing department. More sales calls, more demo requests, more free trial users. One key thing to consider is testing your offer. While there are a million A/B tests you could run, your hard offer is one of the few things that you actually should be testing, because it has a huge impact on your conversion rates and on the marketing copy that you develop. For example, you might A/B test a retirement consultation versus a financial planning consultation, or test 10 free videos as a hard offer versus a 30-day free trial. Let's go through some specific examples of hard offers so you can get an idea of what you might want to use as yours. Here, you can see that the hard offer for each payment plan is the same: try it free. There are 2 hard offers for this plumbing company. One is the phone call, and the second is to schedule online. A demo is the hard offer for outreach. This is a great example of a hard offer, a free piano lesson that provides a lot of value in exchange for a lot of information. It's actually quite difficult to figure out when somebody is ready for your hard offers. Marketers often use lead scoring and other signals. In reality, customers move at different paces and move through different journeys before they arrive at your hard offer. Because you simply don't know when someone's ready, you should be promoting your hard offer virtually everywhere. That means promoting your hard offer within your soft offers, such as at the end of a blog post or inside a white paper. It also means putting it at the bottom of emails and in the thank you pages after people request your soft offers.
Promote your hard offer on Facebook. Once you've decided on what hard offer you're going to offer, you have to think about how to promote it. One of the easiest ways to promote the hard offer is directly on Facebook. But don't just promote it to anybody. Instead, import your list into Facebook and then expand it to similar audiences. Lead nurturing is not always needed to generate marketing qualified leads. If your hard offer shows that it solves an immediate pain point, then it's possible to convert somebody immediately into an MQL. I've had a lot of success pushing hard offers such as demos via Facebook advertising. The key is being very specific about who you're targeting. You really want to understand who bought and will buy your product. Here's an example of a Facebook ad from Jira. Notice that it promotes the free trial rather than some soft offer, such as a white paper or blog post. The sign-up call to action is directly on Facebook, bypassing the need for creating a landing page. Here's another example for software that integrates with WhatsApp. Again, they're pushing the hard offer directly to the Facebook audience. To get started, just do a Google search for Facebook advertising and go into the Ads Manager. Select the type of ad you want to create, which is likely called lead generation in most cases. Select the audience you want, usually by importing a list you've purchased or getting Facebook to create an audience based on who your most valuable customers currently are. Lastly, use one of Facebook's built-in calls to action. Your ads will perform better if the user doesn't have to leave Facebook to go to your landing page. I've had much more success with Facebook native forms than in driving people to my website.
Pay for buyer-ready downloads. A lot of your time is spent trying to attract people who are ready to buy, or nurturing them so that they're ready to buy. And a lot of money is spent pushing lead magnets such as white papers to get people to download who aren't even interested in buying your product. One way around this is to buy from content syndication companies. Here, you can pay them on a CPL or cost per lead basis. In some cases, you can even specify that you're only interested in leads that are close to making a purchase. Why spend a lot of time and money generating downloads when you can just pay a company for each download of your white paper or ebook? Here's an example, the company Pure B2B. Notice that they're selling you leads who are interested in making a purchase in the next 12 months. Isn't this more efficient than going out and hoping your leads are ready to buy? Cold calls. Calling prospective customers is still a viable tactic if what you're selling is somewhat expensive and can therefore justify the cost of making the call. For cheaper products, you need marketing techniques that have better economies of scale, such as display advertising. In recent years, cold calling was popularized by the book Predictable Revenue. This outbound approach to marketing works well for some high-ticket products, so it's worth reading if you think it's a good fit for you. But cold calling can be an abysmal failure that annoys customers if you don't approach it correctly. The most important thing is to get the list right. I mentioned earlier the various ways you can get a list. What you may need to do is A/B test a sample of 2 lists to identify the one that works best. Don't assume the first list you purchase will be effective. There's a lot of tweaking that you need to do to get it right. Don't be afraid to go back to your list broker and tell them that the list didn't work. The key to understanding cold calling is that it works best when it's focused on leads that are close to buying. In other words, the purpose of cold calling is to generate MQLs, marketing qualified leads, leads that are ready to talk to a salesperson. So the word cold call is a bit misleading. In most cases, these are warm calls to leads that have already been nurtured through other means such as email. The only true cold calls that you do are when you buy leads that you know are close to making a purchase. You don't want calls to be at the top of your funnel because A, they're expensive, and B, they're not very scalable. Other marketing tactics such as email or Facebook advertising are better to use in the earlier stages of demand generation. So the key to success with cold calling is actually nurturing the leads before the call. You can do this by importing your list into Facebook and LinkedIn, and then advertising your product or offer to that list. You can also send emails to the list via Outreach for personalized emails and Marketo for generic marketing emails. Additionally, you can send direct mail through programs such as Sendoso. Once your leads are nurtured, they'll be ready for your call, which will convert them into an MQL. When you buy a list, that is where you get the MCLs, or marketing capture leads. Your emails, ads, and direct mail create MELs, or marketing engaged leads. Your phone call is what converts MELs into MQLs. In other words, your phone call will persuade them to agree to a free demo, trial, or something to that effect, whatever your hard offer is. Do not try to sell them a product on the phone unless it's fairly cheap, say less than $1,000. The KPI for cold calling is MQL creation, or how many leads agree to a conversation with an account executive or consultant. One thing you can try is testing different cold call scripts, perhaps focusing on different pain points. You can also test speaking to different decision makers. For example, try one pitch for a CEO, another for a CMO, and yet another for the chief engineer. I also want to remind you again, because this is so important, you want to test different lists. So do not go and spend thousands of dollars on a single list before testing samples from different lists. Lastly, you may want to test different cold calling employees or contractors. These people are generally known as SDRs, Sales Development Representatives, or BDRs, Business Development Representatives. You might also refer to these individuals as outbound sales reps.
Emails aren't as effective as they used to be. SMS open rates are much, much higher, and programs like Slack and WhatsApp are supplanting email in many cases. Regardless, email continues to be one of the most important marketing tools because A, it's free, and B, it enables you to communicate with specific people. The hard part with email is getting people's email addresses. Here's a quick reminder of the different types of lists: a list you purchased, a list you found for free, a list you borrowed or rented, a list you compiled, or a list that you built from the ground up using lead magnets. On the right, you can see an example of a lead magnet, a checklist used to build an email from scratch. One important thing to note is that list building is fundamentally different from customer building. Remember, you can simply buy or borrow a list from someone else. Getting the list is the easy part. Building a list using lead magnets is a bit harder, but it's still fairly easy to convince someone to give up their email for free content. The real challenge is in converting people from that list into paying customers. It's harder to convince someone to buy than to give up their email. There are three basic ways to measure email effectiveness. 1, the open rate, if people actually click your email in their inbox. 2, the click rate, are people actually clicking the link in your email. And 3, the response rate, are people replying to your sales pitch. Or the purchase rate, are people actually buying after reading your email. The problem with email KPIs is that they aren't all that reliable. This is especially true if you haven't set them up correctly in whatever program you are using, such as Marketo for email automation. Open rates are not only low, but they're often inflated due to spam bots. Click rates may include people clicking on subscribe, clicking their Facebook icon, or hitting something by mistake. The response rate may factor in automatic replies from people who are on vacation. People generally overestimate email effectiveness because these KPIs are inflated. They're overestimated. People also overestimate the effectiveness of email for lead nurturing. This is because the KPI they usually use is click rates. But as you can see in this quote from the Spear Marketing Group, lead nurturing should be measured by other factors, such as whether it converts people into paying customers or opportunities, i.e. pipeline revenue. Given the limitations of email KPIs, it's best to measure effectiveness using hard metrics, such as purchases and signups,
instead of soft metrics like open rates. You compare two emails. You may find that one has a really high open rate, while the other has a very low open rate. But the second one, with the low open rate, may actually have a much higher rate of people signing up. The lesson here is not to judge an email based on vanity metrics like open rates. Instead, focus on outcomes that are harder to achieve, like people actually buying your product after clicking your email. Here's another example of a hard metric. People actually booking a conversation with you using Calendly. This is a very strong example of a marketing qualified lead, one that is highly likely to lead to the creation of an opportunity and eventually a new paying customer. When a lot of people approach email marketing, they only put teaser copy in the body. To get the real juicy, helpful information, the reader has to click the email to go to a blog post or white paper or something else that actually has the meat of the information. The advantage here is that you can measure performance better because you see how many people showed interest by clicking. The problem is that a lot of people will never actually see your content because they don't click it. Because you've introduced friction and an unnecessary step. Not only do they have to open your email, but they also have to click it and open up another asset, such as your website or your blog. If your goal is to nurture your leads by getting them to read something, I suggest putting that content directly into the email. For example, paste the content of your blog post directly into the email, or convert that infographic into a graphic email. This may be a better way to push people through your demand generation funnel. Here's an example of an email I received from someone who helps people market their Kindle books. This guy is a really credible person and has promoted one of the top-selling books on Amazon. You can see from this snippet that there are 4 different hyperlinks in the email. Personally, I don't like this. Why do I have to click the links to go somewhere else to get the useful information? You may have my attention right now, so just put the content right here. The approach he is using is helpful in the sense that it gives him data on what people are clicking. But this data comes with huge trade-offs, namely that a lot of people like me just won't bother clicking anything. I've seen research that suggests that text-based emails actually outperform those with fancy graphics. In my experience, this hasn't been true. Readers often respond better to graphic emails. Emails that are blocks of text can be overwhelming or sound too salesy. Visually appealing emails with easy-to-read text can generate new customers. A good example is this email from Jungle Scout promoting different services to Amazon sellers. You can see a nice little promotional graphic on the left for SEO services, along with a very clear call to action on the right in a blue hyperlink. One tip is to put your hard offer in every email. For example, put book a demo at the bottom of every educational email.
Product marketing is basically the exact opposite of marketing professional services. Unfortunately, the people that tend to have the largest share of voice out there are going to be people that work at agencies and consultancies, and often what they'll tell you about product marketing is that it's essentially doing what worked for them in promoting their own agency, their own consultancy. The problem is when we actually look at the research, when we look at the data, we see what works in professional services and what works in product marketing. So with professional services, the most successful formula is going after small niches, narrow specialization. The firms that grow the fastest, the firms that are the most profitable, are the firms that take narrow specialization. And there are a number of reasons for this. One of the reasons is simple economics. If you're selling your time and you only have so many people, the idea is basically to get the highest price point as possible. And the way you're going to be able to charge a very high hourly rate is by specializing. People are going to pay more to see specialists. Moreover, larger clients are willing to pay more for specialists. But when we look at the research with what works with product marketing, it's almost the exact opposite. It has much more to do with appealing to masses of people, going after large markets and not really going after those so-called blue oceans or niche markets, because those simply don't scale very well. And that's the real advantage with products, is products scale very well. So the way that you become successful with product marketing often has little to do with niche positioning or specialization and more to do with taking value propositions, communicating value propositions that are going to appeal to a much larger market to justify the investment in the product and to be able to spread those costs in terms of economies of scale across a large number of buyers.
A lot of people in product marketing become very fixated on things that are relatively minor. An example of this is when they're generating marketing qualified leads. So a marketing qualified lead, by my definition, would be someone signing up perhaps for a demo with your sales team, signing up for a free trial of your product, requesting a consultation, contacting you through a form, something like that would be a marketing qualified lead. And if we use some rough numbers, it might cost around $50. Now, maybe it's $200 in some cases, maybe it's $15 in others, but $50 is generally what it takes to generate a lead when you're doing something like LinkedIn ads or Facebook ads. But I want you to think about how you can go bigger with budgets. And even a budget as small as $50 can actually go a long way. And I'm going to show you an example of a campaign that I'm running right now. It's a brand awareness campaign on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is certainly not the cheapest platform. And you can see here that I was able to reach 6,217 people with a budget of just $82. And the number of impressions was 11,481. So basically, with a budget of $13, I'm able to reach 1,000 people. So if we take that $50 budget that normally would have been used just to generate a single lead, so one lead, I'm able to reach around 4,000 people. So when you're thinking big with product marketing, you have to make these trade-off decisions. Am I interested in the micro, which is generating that one lead, or the macro, which is being able to serve my advertisement to 4,000 people? Now, when you're doing something like advertising, which is really where the rubber hits the road when you're thinking about going big, you would go to something like Create, and you're going to create a new campaign. And one of the main considerations you need to have is, what is the objective? Now, what a lot of product marketers are going to be very focused on is this type of thing: lead generation as an objective, website conversions, especially if you're in something like e-commerce. Job applicants, probably not that applicable for most people unless you're working in HR. Now, when you're moving into the consideration, some people will start to focus more on like clicks, things like website visits, engagement, so things like comments and posts. But when you're really interested in going big and taking your budget and reaching as many people as possible, you're going to be much more interested in the brand awareness objective, potentially also the video views objective. Now, the problem with these objectives is that there's a trade-off. By focusing on the leads, you're going to sacrifice the number of impressions or the number of people that are reached. By focusing on engagement, the way that you drive up the engagement rate is by reducing the amount of people that were exposed to the ad. Similarly, when you're trying to drive clicks, you're trading off how many people are being exposed to your ad, even though perhaps they weren't willing to click it. So when you're thinking about going large, you need to think about appealing to people that aren't willing to engage with your content. They're not willing to click it. They're not willing or ready to become a lead, but they're still being influenced by virtue of the fact that you're simply reaching them. So that's why objectives like awareness, we can see here with LinkedIn, become much more important when you're trying to scale your product marketing. So another consideration when you're trying to scale is not limiting the geography. So mine was limited here to Thailand. What I'm actually interested in is hitting every single continent. So let's put in Asia. Let's put in Europe. Let's put in North America. We're going to put in South America. Oceania. And we're going to put in Africa. So again, geography, expanding our geography means that we're going to be able to influence far more people, and we're not limiting ourselves by having too niche of a targeting. Now, in terms of other criteria that you can put in here, if you put in something specific like product marketing manager as a job title, that's going to get you very, very targeted exposure to groups of people. But the problem is, what about the people that are the product marketing directors? What about the people that are the product marketing associates? So when you're thinking big, you're probably going to think more in terms of marketing as a function rather than as a job title. Or perhaps marketing as a skill in and of itself, even with people that perhaps are working in something like product management. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to job experience and job function. I'm going to check off marketing. So this is going after a much broader audience than I normally otherwise wouldn't if I was restricting myself narrowly to product marketing managers. Now, I'm actually not going to enable audience expansion because I think targeting marketing as a function is broad enough in and of itself, and I don't trust tools like LinkedIn or Facebook to necessarily find me the right people beyond that. And you can still add exclusions to perhaps omit people that are working in sales or HR or something like that. The other big consideration when you're trying to go big is setting your optimization goals. So you can see here that I've set the optimization goal as reach, which is your best option for getting access to more people, to bigger markets. But the other option would be impressions. So I would recommend going with reach because I think it's one of the most undervalued metrics to track when you're doing product marketing. One of the most important things to monitor when you're doing this type of setup is on the right-hand side, the target audience size estimation. So here you can see that it's about 12 million people, which is certainly a very large audience to go after and is going to help you go much larger. Now, if it's too large, what you can do is start looking at the breakdowns and see what can I exclude here. Well, maybe I can exclude entry-level job seniority or people with a certain number of years experience, perhaps exclude some industries, exclude some interests, or perhaps exclude companies that are too big or too small. In the previous lecture, I showed you some examples of where LinkedIn can be used to go big instead of restricting your target audience size. But perhaps a more dramatic demonstration of this would be when you're doing Facebook ads. So you can see I have a number of campaigns here that were really focused on scale, not just leads or clicks or conversions, but really hitting a wide audience. Let's take a look at this campaign. We were able to reach 2.3 million people with 2.7 impressions. The cost to reach 1,000 people was only 7 cents, and the overall amount spent was under $200. So I think there's a misconception that reach campaigns, awareness campaigns, kind of broad marketing is very expensive, and maybe it was when you needed millions of dollars to do TV ads. But now that we have things like Facebook and LinkedIn to do outbound advertising, it's really not that expensive. Now, bear in mind, I don't fully trust Facebook's targeting, particularly when you're using the interest targeting. But if you're able to get the targeting right, perhaps you import a custom audience, then there's no reason that you can't affordably do awareness types of marketing. So if we take a look at some of these other campaigns, you can see this one had a cost per click that was less than half a cent. So very, very cost effective. Have another campaign here that reached around 3,000 people. Have a campaign that I'm running now that reached almost 10,000 people, and it costs only $4 to reach 1,000 people. So even cheaper than the one I demonstrated being run on LinkedIn. So what this means is that more of your budget, more of your energy is going to be spent doing campaigns that are focused less on this kind of bottom of funnel, middle of funnel objectives, things like sales, app installs, leads, engagements, and even traffic to some extent, which is kind of more of a mid-funnel thing. What I'm really interested in is simply influencing as wide an audience as possible. And the way you influence people is by getting them to see your brand, see your product, by getting them to watch videos, and even if they only watch it for 3 seconds. But basically what we're trying to do is get as big an audience as possible within the target customer group. So I'm not saying we need to influence people that could never potentially buy our product, but I'm just saying let's expand to the bounds of who we want to target. And the only way that we can do that efficiently and automatically is basically by doing awareness campaigns. Because if you don't run awareness campaigns, what's going to happen is your frequency is going to get too high. So basically you're going to start serving ads to the same people over and over when you're doing things like traffic campaigns or even video view campaigns in some cases. Now under awareness, we have some different options. So we have reach, we have brand awareness, and video views. And the one that is going to give you the widest scale is going to be reach. Now, brand awareness, which Facebook is going to track by doing something like estimated ad recall, perhaps could be a more efficient way of influencing people so that they actually remember your brand. But in terms of just raw, how do we get the size up of who we're exposed to, that's going to be really focused on reach. One of the biggest considerations when you're looking at channels is simply how big of an audience you can reach. Now, I've dabbled in all sorts of different channels. I've done Twitter advertising, I've done Google advertising, but often really it's only worth your time to focus on certain channels where you can reach a large number of people within your target customer group. So one of the big challenges with Google ads is that you just don't have much control over who's seeing your product, over who's seeing your brand, over who you're promoting your offer to. And that's because the way you're defining the audience is based on what they're searching. And often you're limited to people that are actually in market or actively searching for a solution. And when we look at the research, that's usually only around 5% of people per quarter, at least in the business-to-business space. So if only 5% of the people are in market, then you need to look to other channels to be able to get to those people that are not actively looking for a solution. Now, one way to do that would be to use something like LinkedIn. So I just created an advertising campaign. I put the geography as the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. I put in the job title here as veterinarian. And you can see that on the right, we have an estimated audience size of 71,000. So that's a very viable size of an audience to do a long-term advertising campaign. Now, we can also try to do something similar with Facebook. So I just created this dummy campaign here, put in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and I put in the relevant job titles that Facebook provides, which are associate veterinarian and veterinarian small animal. So they don't just have a classification for veterinarian. But you see one of the limitations here is that the estimated audience size is only around 7,000 to 8,000. So that's about 1/10 of what we can achieve with LinkedIn. So I could spend all day, every day, trying to optimize the Facebook ads and getting them perfect and doing A/B testing and all sorts of tweaking. But at the end of the day, I'm only reaching 1/10 of the people that I could be reaching if I just did something on LinkedIn. So this is the mindset I want you to have of thinking big, is less in terms of tweaking and more in terms of what are the big blind spots or missed opportunities. And in this case, the missed opportunity is just simply going on LinkedIn, where you can reach a much larger audience. In the last few lectures, I was fundamentally talking about how you reach more and more people. I didn't really talk much about positioning. The reason, and this is controversial for me to say, is that positioning isn't really as important as you may think it is, particularly at the highest levels of product marketing. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons I say it is because when we look at the research, and in particular business to business, but also in business to consumer, the big problem isn't so much what people think of your product, it's that they haven't even thought of your product at all. So how you're positioned often is not the biggest issue you need to address. It's just, have people even heard of you? Are they even considering you regardless of what your positioning is? Now, a lot of this really depends on your definition of positioning. And there really is no consensus on what that is. And some people have this conflation between positioning and marketing strategy, but I treat them as two separate things. So if you define positioning as having to do something with selecting your target market, then yes, that's a strategic decision, and that should come before you do something like an awareness campaign, because you need to know who the target customer group is, for example, before you go and start marketing to them. However, the way I define positioning is making the choice of what to emphasize in your marketing communications. And what you emphasize is going to vary based on case. Are you talking about the brand, which is going to be positioned around something for the long term and something for mass appeal? Are you positioning the product, which tends to take a more rational positioning because it's more around short-term consideration factors? Are we talking about an advertisement positioning where we may be focused on just a single use case, or perhaps a single benefit or a single feature? Or are we talking about a campaign which may be focused on a series of different features or use cases? So positioning is going to vary. Now, based on my definition, which is positioning is choosing what to emphasize in your marketing communications, why might it be less important? So the reason is that as you get bigger and bigger, and as your ambitions get bigger and you want to become one of the biggest players on the market, essentially your end game in marketing is a oligopolistic competition. So you want to be one of the handful of big players that are competing against each other at scale. Now, what's the problem with emphasizing positioning? Well, one of the rabbit holes you end up in is if your positioning's too good, or your positioning matters a lot, you kind of end up in a niche market. If you have a unique angle and you're really highlighting just one or two different things, you're probably not appealing to a large enough market. Now, there's going to be exceptions to that, but I'm just talking in generalities. So sometimes what happens is if you get big enough, really you just have to take broad positioning because that's necessary to appeal to a large market. And that's what your competitors are doing. And you might think, oh, well, we need to be different. Well, points of difference cease to matter as much when really the competitive advantage is economies of scale. So that's what happens as you get bigger. It becomes battles of economies of scale and battles of awareness, product awareness, brand awareness, etc. Less about how do we take niche positionings. Now, if you're a small niche player, that's fine. You can have a unique position and you can have a sustainable business built around that, but that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about going big. Now, I want to compare this to some research from Jeffrey Pfeffer. So Jeffrey Pfeffer is not a marketer. He talks about things like leadership and how people get to high, powerful positions in industry. And one of the reasons they get promoted or they get to these high positions in the corporate world is simple. They get noticed because people that get noticed are considered. And that's perhaps the biggest barrier to your success in product marketing is that people just never heard of you. And if they've never heard of you, they're never going to consider you. And it just simply doesn't matter how you position yourself if that message doesn't get to anybody. So the analogy I like to use is laws that don't get enforced. So there's legislation that gets passed, and sometimes that legislation's completely ridiculous and nobody would ever follow it. But those laws, they don't matter. The reason they don't matter is because there's no weight behind them. They're not getting enforced, and they're not getting any awareness. So that's what I want you to think about when you're going big with your product marketing is the big issue how you're positioned, or is the big issue that most of your TAM, your total addressable market, just doesn't even have you in their mind at all? I gave you some examples of how you can run awareness campaigns that are focused on reach to reach as many people as possible. But the real key to growth is not simply getting in front of as many people as possible, but it's getting in front of them and making sure that there is an association between your product or your brand and something specific. And what that specific thing is using McKinsey's terminology, a trigger, or what the B2B Institute calls a buying situation. So basically what you want is you want to raise the level of awareness that there is for your product around certain key trigger events so that when those trigger events happen, you're one of the first products that they think of to help alleviate the problem or achieve the result that they're looking for. So one of the reasons this is so important is because if we look at this consumer journey, so business to consumer journey from McKinsey, we see that the journey begins with a trigger. There's some sort of trigger event that happens. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's hunger, maybe it's lunch break. Whatever it is, there's a trigger event, and then people think of their initial consideration set. So this is a cluster of products, services, brands, etc., that could help them get through that trigger. So what you're doing with your marketing communications, and specifically with your advertising, is fusing those things together, the trigger and your brand. It's not simply enough to raise awareness, because the fact that people heard of your brand name or they heard of your product is great, and that helps you become famous, but it's not necessarily going to help somebody think of your product when they have a need for whatever problem it is that you solve. So you have to build that connection. So here we can see that it's important with business to consumer. Now let's take a look at the business to business customer journey. And we see again, it also begins with this trigger. And only after the trigger do people seek to identify avenues of solutions to whatever problem that has occurred. So very important in consumer marketing, very important in business to business marketing. So there's McKinsey's model. And then if we look at the Business to Business Institute from LinkedIn, we see that one of the keys to growth for business-to-business companies is really raising awareness in more buying situations, the buying situations that trigger people to start thinking about different products that could solve their problems. And they're giving the example here of Microsoft Teams. And specific events might be, I need to call my boss, I need to host a webinar, or I need to call my mom. So the example they're demonstrating is, you may not immediately think of using Teams when you need to call your mom. So Microsoft, if they're trying to be known for that use case, for that trigger event, then what they could do is they could run awareness advertising showing people calling their moms using Microsoft Teams. And that's what you should be doing. You should be focusing on what are those buying situations, what are those triggers, and how can we fuse them with our specific product. I once had a CEO ask me, how do we improve the conversion rate of our website? So what did I do? Well, I looked for A/B testing opportunities. Let's change the homepage. Let's change the pricing page. And yeah, you can get a lot of improvement out of that. You can extract a few extra percentage points when it comes to conversions. You can improve the bounce rate. There's all sorts of things you can improve. And then what I did was I started looking at the Wayback Machine, and I started looking at trends of how the website had changed over time and what the conversion rates were like then versus now. But the CEO really pressed me, and he said, listen, I want you to think about what would 10x the business. So instead of fiddling around with kind of these minor conversion lifts or what you might call growth marketing, he was really pushing me to try to achieve some material gains for the company. So then I discovered, using SEMrush, this little cool feature called the audience overlap. And the audience overlap tool showed me that about half the people that were visiting our website were also visiting a website that appealed almost 100% to developers. And this was a huge insight because it was a breakthrough. It made me realize that about half the people visiting our website were not actually potential buyers for the product. What they were influencers. These were the developers that influenced the buyers, that influenced the target customers. So then what this led to was the development of a whole partnership marketing program that trained the partners, gave them certifications, etc. So that was a critical insight where you can see how thinking big really pushes you to find the things that are going to be inflection points rather than just sort of minor optimization points. But I want to encourage you to use something else, because the way I did it using the audience overlap tool with SEMrush, that's fine, but there's something more sophisticated. It's called website demographics, and it's something offered by LinkedIn. Essentially what it is kind of like a free Google Analytics tool, But instead of just giving you anonymous data or high-level data about where people are located, it actually gives you professional insights about the types of individuals that are visiting your website. So you can see here, you might see that they're C-suite, or you might see that they're engineers, all sorts of insightful information like industries, etc. So when you think about something like a Facebook pixel or a LinkedIn pixel that you install on your website, usually it's something you want to use to track the performance of advertising. But regardless of whether you're doing advertising, I really think you should install the LinkedIn pixel. It's called an insight tag. And the reason is to be able to use this website demographics information. What it's going to do is it's going to be able to give you data not only on who the individuals are and what their professions are visiting your website, but to see it at the granular level. Like perhaps certain types of people are visiting your blog. Maybe those are directors, whereas the people going to your homepage perhaps are the C-suite or something like that. So what it's going to do is it's going to surface insights that can have a much more substantial impact on your marketing so that you can go big instead of just thinking about minor changes like if we change the CTA button color, or we call it a consultation versus a demo, or kind of these little tactical things. You can think more high-level strategic things about could we appeal to huge partners, for example? Could we appeal to influencers such as developers or lawyers or accountants? And could we appeal to different industries that perhaps we didn't realize were even visiting our website? One of the easiest ways to go big with your marketing is to simply pay to reach more people. You do that with awareness campaigns. You do it by bidding per impression. You do it by optimizing for things like the cost to reach 1,000 people. However, very sophisticated advertisers, what they do is they don't just rely on the paid reach, so what they're explicitly paying a media company like LinkedIn or Facebook or TV to reach people, but they're relying on virality, they're relying on word of mouth, they're kind of counting on people sharing the content. And that's why the types of advertising that creative geniuses come up with looks very, very different from the typical types of ads that you would normally see, especially in the business-to-business space, which is very rational and to the point. Now, the question is how you measure these types of marketing assets. And it's not always easy, but sometimes it is. So for example, if we go into the LinkedIn Campaign Manager, they have a section here called columns, which gives you interesting data about things like reach and frequency, which you can find under delivery, engagement, people engaging with your posts. You can see various video metrics. But the one that I'm particularly interested in is the customized option. So let's go to the customized column. And what I did was I did a search here for viral. So let's see what viral options there are. So you can see they have a number of KPIs that are tied to virality. So viral impressions, viral clicks, viral reactions, viral comments, etc., etc., etc. So there are all sorts of KPIs that perhaps most people in marketing advertising don't even realize that these exist. And essentially what it's telling you is how much of the content from your advertising campaign is producing free results as a result of people simply sharing it and as a result of your advertising triggering word of mouth. So when you're thinking about going big with your marketing, often what it means is it's starting initially with advertising, perhaps advertising to people that are more influential, and then relying on this cascade effect that happens from people sharing it, other people seeing it in their feeds, et cetera, et cetera. And you can measure all of this by using these various viral KPIs. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we can see here that I created a custom filter here based on viral metrics, and not a lot of success here with these campaigns because they weren't designed for virality. But we can see here for one, we had 2 viral video views. So that's a step in the right direction. And overall, we got 13 viral impressions here for all of the campaigns. This specific campaign got 6 viral impressions. So there's some sort of reverberation happening there where you're not just paying to throw the pebble in the water, but you're designing your marketing to create this cascade effect that's essentially free. I just showed you some hard metrics where we can measure the success of viral word-of-mouth types of marketing. But perhaps the bigger question is, how do we generate word-of-mouth? What are the drivers of word-of-mouth, and what are the types of word-of-mouth? So to begin, we're going to look at McKinsey. And McKinsey has basically identified that there are 3 categories of word-of-mouth. So the first is experiential. Essentially, what this means is people use your product, and based on their experience using it, they choose to talk about it. And sometimes the way they talk about it is bad. So for example, when airlines lose your luggage, you're apt to complain about that. So what's particularly important here is stimulating positive word of mouth. And we'll get to some details about that in a moment. Now, the second is consequential. So this is basically when you do something like an advertising campaign, and you're paying to reach people. But then there's an element of that campaign that's designed to further reverberate through word of mouth. So there's some sort of pass-on amplification of it using things like perhaps humor, or maybe there's some sort of utility in your ads that people would want to share it with other people. And the third is intentional. So this is when the campaign has basically been designed for the purpose of generating word of mouth. And McKinsey's talking here about using celebrity endorsements. So an example of this was I once identified about a few dozen influencers, and I got them all to simultaneously broadcast a product so that it would generate some sort of viral feedback loops. If people saw one influencer using the product and then another influencer, and they saw them all at once, that there's this mindset that this product is huge, it's popular, it's trendy. One of the most important things to think about when you're trying to generate word of mouth is what aspects of your product are people most likely to talk about. And it's not necessarily the things that are most important, it's the things that have the most talkability. So a few examples here from McKinsey is in the mobile phone category, design is more important than battery life. In skincare, packaging and ingredients create more powerful word of mouth than do emotional messages about a product and how it makes them feel. Now, another important thing that McKinsey is highlighting here is that often campaigns are more effective at stimulating word of mouth when they talk about functional messages, so things like product features, instead of emotions. And that's even true with things like cosmetics, where you would think that emotional positioning would be the type of thing that people would want to talk about. But no, often it's things like this product simply achieved the outcome that I wanted. Now, another key important aspect of word of mouth is identifying the people that have disproportionate influence. And these people are what McKinsey are calling influentials. I call them influencers. And you can get more granular if you want with that terminology. But the common factor that they have here is often trust and competence. And often I think it's effective also just to simply go after people that just have large audiences. Whether or not you want to call those influencers or not is up to you. So we can see that influentials typically generate 3 times more word of mouth messages than non-influentials do. So we see kind of an 80-20 rule here, where perhaps most of the outcomes of our word of mouth campaigns are going to come from the small group of people that have the biggest capacity to stimulate that word of mouth. So it might be more important to market to them initially instead of to the wider consumer base. I've mentioned numerous times in my other courses that one of the easiest ways to identify influentials or influencers is by using SparkToro. You can go in here and define who your audience is using various ways. So what they talk about, what they have in their profile, social accounts that they follow, websites that they frequent, etc. So what I'm going to have here is words that they use in their profile. So we can put in something here like product manager and do a search. And basically what SparkToro is going to spit out here is what are the brands, the social channels, the individuals, the websites that have a lot of clout with my target customers. And here we can see, for example, that Shreyas here is highly influential among product managers. So if I'm trying to build a campaign for word of mouth, it might be worth aligning with this person, whether I pay them directly or perhaps I do a webinar with this person or get them involved somehow with a video or a blog post. I could also go through podcasts and see, well, maybe I could be a guest speaker on a specific podcast. Maybe I could do a guest post on a Twitter channel, a Facebook channel, etc. These are various ways that you can drive word of mouth. Another thing that McKinsey is telling us is that word of mouth is more effective when it happens in tight, trusted networks. So that's why it may be important, for example, to identify certain Slack channels or closed communities where a lot of trusted conversations are happening. For me, for example, I'm part of the Product Marketing Alliance, the PMA Slack channel, where I provide a lot of advice to people, product managers that are asking advice. Product managers will give me advice. So there's an element of trust there that this isn't just a self-promotion or some sort of convoluted message or distrustful message. So when you're trying to stimulate word of mouth, you might want to identify what those trusted networks are. And often they circulate around what you might call small-scale influencers. So those are going to be people like lawyers and accountants. Accountants are very highly trusted, physiotherapists, doctors, and even these professionals and how they network with one another, not necessarily just with their clients. Let's continue with some ideas about how you can harness word of mouth. So one way is to give customers opportunities to share positive experiences. So for example, you could have some sort of social media thing where if you post a picture of using your product in a certain situation, perhaps you get entered to win a prize or something like that. You could also build buzz around products before launch. And one way to do that is to have influential adopters be part of like an advisory committee. Maybe you give them some sort of special status and involve them in the product development, or perhaps if they're not involved in the product development, maybe they're just involved in the go-to-market. And you can have perhaps closed online communities to facilitate that feedback. You might want to create like an advisory council or something, and perhaps there's certain badges they get for participating. Another idea is to refresh the product experience to help harness word of mouth. One of the reasons that this is effective is because word of mouth tends to be more successful early in a product's life cycle. So often your biggest opportunities is going to be centered around product launches, or if it's not around the product launch, it's around the launch of like new features or rebrands or new additions to the product. Because you can piggyback off of those to help generate word of mouth. It's kind of like in journalism where anything that's new is more likely to get published and to get buzz than something that's just been around for a long time. So in terms of product attributes, the ones that people are really going to talk about are going to be those that deviate significantly from expectations. But it's not just whether that deviation exists, so whether it was an overly positive or exaggeratedly negative experience, but it's also, are those dimensions things that people want to talk about? So for example, battery life is a crucial driver of satisfaction, but it's not necessarily what people are going to talk about. They're may be more likely to talk about design or usability. So that means it's important to identify what is exceptional about your product, and then of those subset of exceptional attributes, which ones of those have intrinsic word of mouth potential, and those are the ones that you're going to want to highlight in your marketing and really hammer in the point that you're substantially different based on those attributes. For example, indestructibility. With electronics or with car windows, something that you could throw a sledgehammer at and it doesn't break. Well, that might be something people are going to talk about, and they may not talk about some sort of hidden feature behind the hood of your product. Another way to generate word of mouth is simply to design your ads so that they have word of mouth potential. An example of this is Cadbury has this ridiculous ad of a gorilla playing drums. Which sounds absurd from a conventional marketing standpoint, but in terms of being able to generate buzz, it was extremely effective. So we can see views over 6 million times online as of the writing of this article. Another example we have here is Red Bull, which identifies which celebrities are most likely to influence the target customers, and then seeding them with the right messages so that they can promote Red Bull through events. Now, if you're in business to business, this might be similar. It perhaps maybe identifying what are the big industry events that are happening in the year, and perhaps you're on a panel with a highly influential person that influences IT directors, and you do a presentation together, or you simply are seen together, so that that association is built. Burger King did this groundbreaking advertising campaign where they're showing their burger getting moldy, which seems completely absurd. Why would somebody want to associate Burger King with something moldy and completely distasteful? The reason is because they're trying to fuse the connection between something that is natural and doesn't have artificial preservatives and Burger King, the brand, and the Whopper, their product. So when you first look at something like that, particularly people that are in business-to-business marketing, they're going to be like, well, that's absurd. It's irrational. It's not even highlighting the primary benefit of the product, which is it being tasteful and convenient. But when you look at it from a more sophisticated perspective, it's incredible, because not only is Burger King getting the benefit of just the paid reach of paying to get people to watch this video and to see their images, but they're also getting the reverberation, which is going to come from the PR. A lot of people are going to be talking about this. You're going to have formal journalistic entities that are going to be writing about it. You're going to have people on LinkedIn that work in advertising and design that are going to be talking about it. People are going to be talking about it on Facebook. There's going to be this huge reach that's going to be totally free for Burger King because they've designed the campaign this way. And on top of that, they're creating awareness in the way that they want to, which is fusing the connection between I want something that is natural and organic to eat for lunch or breakfast or whatever, and I'm going to make that association between Burger King and this. And it's going to really embed itself in people's psyche when something's this bold. So I think it's an absolutely genius thing. I think that it's raising awareness not just for the Burger King brand, not just for the burger product, but also raising awareness in the right context, in the right buying situation, which is that I want something that's a bit healthier, that's a bit more natural, and I'm going to think of Burger King because I have this visceral image of a moldy burger that will go bad because it doesn't have preservatives in it. The real secret to going big with your marketing is when you start to think of yourself like a portfolio manager. So, for example, in the investment world, a manager may be allocating budget towards large companies, towards high growth potential companies. They might throw in some bonds. They have a smorgasbord of different investments that they're playing with. And the idea is, let's get the allocation right. The problem that I see with a lot of marketers is they don't really think like portfolio managers. They're more interested in figuring out what channel's best, how do I fully optimize a given channel, and generally there's heavy emphasis on the bottom of the funnel where they're just trying to either generate leads in business to business, particularly marketing qualified leads, or they're trying to generate sales when they're doing something like business to consumer e-commerce. But sophisticated marketing doesn't work like that. That's not how you achieve economies of scale. That's not how you achieve efficiency. You achieve those things by doing integrated marketing communications. And integrated marketing communications means that you need to allocate time, resources, and budget towards each stage of the funnel, and then synergize together, you're able to get the outcomes that you want, which is going to be things like pipeline revenue in B2B or sales in B2C, customer acquisition, user acquisition, etc. So generally speaking, based on empirical research, the optimal allocation of your budget is going to be around 50% top of funnel and 50% bottom of funnel. Now, I like to break this down further, and I have the top of funnel, the middle of the funnel, and the bottom of the funnel. And then if you want to get even more granular, these are the stages of awareness that I want to appeal to at each stage of the funnel. So at the very top, we have brand unaware people that aren't familiar with your logo, they're not familiar with your brand name. So what you should be doing is you should be taking a percentage of your budget and allocating it purely towards brand awareness. And you're not going to measure success based on sales, clicks, etc. You're going to be measuring it based on things like reach, brand recall, brand awareness, brand fame. Are people associating your brand with the buying situation or with the trigger event? So perhaps if they get sued, do they think of using your legal software, for example? Or if they have a new website, do they think about using your e-commerce integration or your live chat? So the way that you measure success of brand awareness is often not that easy. It might involve things like survey research or potentially qualitative interviews, talking to people that visit your website, things like that. So behavioral metrics aren't necessarily that definitive when you're dealing with the top of the funnel. So because things are unclear, because it's a bit whiffy-waffy, that's why a lot of product marketing managers don't bother doing it at all. But you do need to do it, and you should be allocating a large budget towards it. So now, the second stage is problem unaware people. So these are people that are not aware that the problem that you solve, that your product solves, is actually worth prioritizing. It's worth paying attention to. So you need to spend marketing convincing them that that problem needs to be focused on and it needs to be prioritized over other problems. And you can do things like using research to do that. Now, one of the reasons that I have brand unaware at the far left here is because when you're doing brand marketing, pure brand marketing, and I'm talking about marketing the brand that's pegged to the product, separate from the product itself. So there's the product, which has its features, and then there's the brand, which creates value over and above the features of the product. And that's something that you kind of slap on as a label. So that's going to be things like your mascot, your logo, your brand name, etc. So there's this brand marketing as an asset that needs to be treated differently. Now, one of the reasons that is very different from these other stages, generally speaking, is because brand marketing is something you do for the long term, and long-term marketing often revolves more around things like emotions and maybe loose affiliations with things, whereas when you're marketing something like your product, it tends to be much more straightforward and rational, talking about the justification for buying you, talking about specific use cases, etc. Now, as we move into the middle of the funnel, there are people that need to be convinced that whatever product category you're in is something that they need to engage in to solve their problems. So, for example, if you're a live chat plugin, you need to convince them that live chat is the solution to their problem. Not necessarily your product or your specific brand, but just the category in general. For example, I was marketing dictation software for veterinarians. And because this was fairly new, that a lot of veterinarians don't use dictation software, the marketing is really about selling dictation itself. The virtues of dictation is kind of minor as to what specific product or brand is being pegged to that message at that point. Now, next, what does matter is your specific product, how it's different, how it creates value over and above the competition, why they should choose you specifically, and making sure that people actually remember your specific product. Now, one of the big problems I see when you go to websites that product marketing managers have worked on is the website's 100% focused on getting the conversion, like a demo request, a free trial sign up, a free consultation, etc. But really, what ends up happening is 70% of those leads, according to Dr. James Anderson, basically get ignored or thrown out by the sales team. So what's happening here? I think one of the big things that's happening is these people are being pressured or cajoled into signing up for a demo request, but they haven't even really gotten any product education. So one area where I think product marketing managers could improve is using the website as an education tool, less as a conversion tool, so that we have some asset that is focused on creating product awareness, product education. Okay, now moving into the bottom of the funnel,
we have people that are free offer unaware. So your free offer is like your free trial, your demo, your consultation, etc. Now, a lot of people do focus here, and they focus here too much. One of the reasons they focus here too much, I believe, is because it's not really scalable. There are only so many people that are willing to show up to a sales meeting, to contact you, to engage one-on-one with the salesperson, or in the case of e-commerce or business to consumer, maybe sign up to get coupons or something like that. So in this case, there are things you can do that can optimize your marketing that a lot of people don't. So for example, you can incentivize people to show up to meetings. And despite what a lot of people might say, this is actually very effective. And there's tons of case studies to show that you can generate $1 million plus by doing campaigns, promoting things like gift cards or giving people money to show up to something like a demo. Now, the last stage here, we have paid offer unaware. So people that need to be educated about your contract terms, they need to be convinced to pull the trigger. There needs to be some sense of urgency to get them to sign up for your product and not competing products. Now, fundamentally, this is where sales plays a role, but there is a role in marketing. So here, what we're doing is we're helping with sales enablement, we're helping with battle decks, we're helping by doing competitive comparisons, and we're helping by doing always on marketing. So always marketing to people even before they become customers, even when they're in this sort of bottom of funnel stage. Familiarity with your brand and your product is really going to help seal the deal. So the big decision you really need to make is allocating budget to each of these stages, or maybe you use different stages, that's fine. But the point is that you need to commit to putting budget towards the top of funnel, the middle of the funnel, not just the bottom of the funnel. And you need to do that from the get-go. Because if you don't make that commitment from the get-go, what's going to happen is you're going to start looking at the data, and you may have ran a campaign that was designed just to create brand awareness, but then you're like, oh, it's not getting many clicks, it's not getting many purchases, let's kind of pause that campaign and put more budget here. That's the wrong way to do it. You need to commit to doing things that is purely about education, purely about brand awareness, purely about things that are going to set the stage for more scalable bottom of funnel conversions ultimately down the road. And down the road, I mean in 6+ months, not just focused on what's going to happen to meet quota this month.
Making marketing go viral. A lot of managers will scoff at the idea of creating viral content. They don't take viral planning seriously. I do. The first reason I take it seriously is because I've seen deep research into different customer journeys. Word of mouth is arguably the single most important part of that journey. People hear about products from other people. So one way or another, a good marketer will find a way to drive word of mouth. The second reason I take virality seriously is because one of the top business schools in the world does. There is some serious research on viral marketing that's happened at Wharton, the Ivy League business school at the University of Pennsylvania. My foundation for viral marketing comes from Professor Jonah Berger, author of the book Contagious. I'll walk you through this framework that makes things spread virally. This is the framework called STEPS. Each letter represents a factor in virality. I'll walk you through each of these. Social currency. People like to share things that make them look good to others. For example, you might share a company's video if it makes you look intelligent. Triggers. People share things when they are triggered to do so with reminders. For example, Irish products are likely to get shared on St. Patrick's Day because St. Patrick's Day is a trigger. Emotion. People share things that are emotionally arousing. Content that makes us angry or uplifted are likely to energize us to take action and to share it. Public. When something is public, it is far more likely to spread than something that is private. For example, an Apple laptop with a visible logo is more likely to spread than a laptop with no logo on it. Practical value. Things that provide practical use for information are likely to get shared. For example, a tip sheet on buying a new home will likely get shared with a friend who is looking to buy a new home. Stories. People tend to think more in terms of narratives than in terms of facts. Embedding a brand message in a story with a beginning, middle, and end
is more likely to be remembered and shared than a list of benefits.
Messaging within your product. A lot of a PMM's role is to write or provide feedback on messaging within apps. Here are 2 examples of this type of messaging. The first is a message from Udemy providing a weekend sale. The second is a message from another software company called Onbounce. This is just a notification about software updates. Both of these examples are taken from my laptop. Here are 2 additional examples of in-app messaging from mobile. The first is a pop-up designed to get people to upgrade. The second is a push notification for Hulu. All of these messages are somewhat disruptive. They aren't embedded within the standard user interface. Here is an example of messaging built into the normal user experience. Most of this is written to get people on mint.com to get their credit score. As you can see, there is a lot of variety of messages you'll work with as a product marketing manager. I can't prepare you for every type of messages you'll encounter, so I'll give you a few key approaches. These will give you a foundation to work with many different situations and many different messages. The first consideration to keep in mind is to stay on brand. In this context, that means using language that is consistent with the brand. Many companies will have a brand guide, and if not, you may even need to make one from scratch. The brand guide should outline what kind of personality your brand has, and may even go into details about specific copywriting that is preferred to align with the brand voice. Let me show an example where brand compliance is important. This is an ad for Metromile. Notice the humorous poetry in the beginning and the use of the word tada. This is a very casual and friendly brand. It sounds as though Metromile wants to be your friend. If you were writing messages for this brand, you'd want to be consistent and use this chummy language. Consistency is really important because it builds a strong brand position in the minds of customers. Inconsistency would dilute your brand positioning. If your brand's personality is more professional, you'll want to avoid the kind of language Metromile uses. Brand guides can be much more specific than this. There may actually be complete phrases you can pull from the brand guide that'll be appropriate for your specific message. Each feature might have key bullet points that have already been vetted by copywriters, executives in your company, etc. The second big consideration is to be persuasive. I cannot understate this point. So much of what you will do as a product marketing manager has to do with persuasion. And this is particularly true when it comes to writing. Sometimes people get confused. They think their goal is to communicate or to be precise. But in the majority of cases, what you are really trying to do is persuade a user. That could be persuading them to buy a product, to use a feature, to click a button, to believe in your company, or to take some action. The thought leader on persuasion is the Professor Robert Cialdini. He is famous for his book Influence. I'll walk you through his key drivers of persuasion. The first is scarcity. People are motivated to take action if they believe something is scarce. For example, using the phrase 3 days left persuades people to act because whatever you're offering is only available for 3 days. If it were available all the time, there's no sense of urgency. People prioritize things that have time sensitivity associated with them. People don't like missing out on opportunities. The second key driver of persuasion is consensus. People are motivated to do things if they believe that other people are doing that same thing. Social proof is an incredibly strong persuasive tactic. The example I have here is 90% of people prefer. If 90% of people prefer this option, then the user will likely choose that action. Some people are nonconformists, but the vast majority of people rely on consensus or social proof to make decisions. And this is particularly true in situations where the user isn't informed enough to make a decision on his or her own. Number 3, authority. People are persuaded if someone in a position of authority tells them to do something. Using phrases such as Dr. Joe Stevens or the expert in this field will persuade people. 4, reciprocity. As humans, we have a compulsion to reciprocate when given something. Giving people something for free could motivate them to take action in return. Another key concept to keep in mind is consistency. People want to be consistent. If they told you something in the past, they want their future actions to be consistent with what they said previously. You could remind people of what they did in the past or what they said by using phrases such as, "Since you enjoyed this product," this may prompt people to buy something or take action consistent with their past actions. Lastly, people are persuaded by things they like. Using cheesy phrases such as "you are awesome" can give your product more persuasive power, because this is flattery. This makes your brand more likable. User experience with this type of language can be particularly pleasant. Flattery is a powerful tool for building your brand personality and giving your brand and product persuasive power. Let's analyze this Udemy message using the framework I gave you for persuasion. Scarcity. Udemy is really emphasizing a sense of urgency. One day only, weekend, today. Consensus and authority aren't emphasized in this particular message. Reciprocity does play somewhat of a role here, since Udemy is giving you a sale, a discount. Consistency is another concept being utilized here. Note the phrase, "put your dreams first." If you agree that these are your dreams, then why are you not taking action consistent with your dreams and your beliefs? Liking isn't particularly strong here, but I do notice it. Put your dreams first. People tend to like it when conversations center around them and their needs. The word "your" is important here. Personalization is itself a useful tool for persuasion. Not every message you write needs to use all of these tactics, but chances are that most messaging you do will use at least one of these.